Amidst the jubilant atmosphere of the wedding reception, the mother-in-law took the stage to deliver her anticipated speech. However, what she uttered left the room in stunned silence. With an air of brazenness, she revealed a deeply personal detail: the bride's inability to conceive. In truth, my son knew well of her infertility, but he insisted on this union regardless. She may lack in one aspect, but she excels in her career. So begrudgingly, I consented to their marriage. The shock of her words reverberated through the hall, leaving me speechless in their wake. How could she so callously reduce a woman to her reproductive abilities, and then flaunt it before our gathered guests? Oblivious to the distress she had caused, the mother-in-law surveyed the room with a smug expression, unaware of the discomfort her words had wrought. In the hushed aftermath, my name, Catherine, seemed to echo with a weighty significance. A 31-year-old professional in the dynamic realm of product development, I thrive in my career, contributing to several successful projects. Despite outward contentment, there's a secret burden I carry, one I dare not share with anyone. 5 years ago, I received the crushing news. I was infertile. The revelation left me reeling with shock and despair. In those dark days, I grappled with feelings of worthlessness and the loss of hope for any semblance of a future. Even my then-boyfriend couldn't weather the storm, ultimately ending our relationship. Overwhelmed by sorrow and frustration, I threw myself into my work, seeking solace in its demands to drown out the relentless echo of despair. Looking back, I realized I was merely evading reality, clinging to the refuge of productivity to shield myself from the painful truth. Yet amidst the turmoil, a glimmer of hope emerged. Through unwavering dedication, a product I poured myself into became a resounding success, elevating my standing at work. Convinced that marriage was now beyond my grasp due to my infertility, I resigned myself to the solitary path of societal contribution through labor. Then, a serendipitous encounter altered the course of my destiny. In a routine meeting for product development, I crossed paths with David, a man my age from a client company. Little did I know he would become the harbinger of change in my life. David, the son of his company's president and head of the planning department, and I swiftly exchanged contact information. Initially, our interactions were confined to professional matters, but gradually, our conversations transcended the confines of business, blossoming into a romantic connection. In David, I discovered an unexpected reservoir of love and kindness that I had long deemed unattainable. However, the specter of my infertility loomed large, a secret I dared not disclose for fear of losing him. Yet, as our relationship deepened, the weight of my silence grew heavier, gnawing at my conscience. How could I keep such a fundamental truth from someone who regarded me with unwavering sincerity? Uncertain of the outcome, yet determined to be transparent about my condition, I braced myself for the inevitable. Summoning courage, I disclosed my infertility to David, fully prepared for the possibility of his departure. Despite my resolve, anxiety gnawed at my insides as I broached the subject. To my astonishment, David's reaction wasn't what I anticipated. Tears welled in his eyes as he offered me solace, expressing gratitude for my honesty. His unwavering kindness moved me to tears, etching the moment into my memory like an indelible mark. Contrary to my fears, our relationship only flourished after that pivotal conversation. 2 years later, on a momentous evening at a restaurant, David presented me with a small case, unveiling a ring that glittered with promise. "Catherine, will you marry me?" His unexpected proposal ignited a whirlwind of emotions within me, joy mingled with apprehension. "David, are you certain? I can't bear children. Can you truly accept that?" Though David comprehends my predicament, the weight of marriage introduces a new dimension of uncertainty. I couldn't readily say yes to his proposal, burdened by doubts. "It doesn't matter, Catherine. I want us to navigate life's challenges together, to weather every storm side by side," David reassured, acknowledging my concerns with unwavering support. In that poignant moment, tears flowed freely, a testament to the emotions swirling within me. Since the day I received my diagnosis, I never envisioned this future. Yet in David's unwavering love, I found the courage to embrace it. With certainty in my heart, I'd accepted his proposal, ready to face whatever lay ahead, as long as we faced it together. "I share your sentiment, David. Thank you for your unwavering care. I'd eagerly anticipate the journey ahead of us," I replied, gratitude laced in my words as we embarked on the path to wedded bliss. With the proposal accepted, we wasted no time in setting the wheels in motion for our impending nuptials. As a woman in her 30s, the prospect of becoming a wife ignited a sense of urgency within me, eager as I was to intertwine our lives officially. Funny how swiftly one wishes to hasten time once the promise of matrimony is extended. The reality of marriage loomed closer, heightening my anticipation with each passing moment. However, before exchanging vows, we had to confront a significant hurdle: meeting David's parents. While our encounters with them had been brief in the past, this meeting carried weight as we prepared to divulge news of our engagement. Unfortunately, the reception of our impending union was far from smooth sailing. While David's father greeted the news with joy, his mother maintained a stern countenance throughout the exchange. When the moment came for her to express her thoughts, her opposition to our marriage was palpable. "Catherine, I cannot condone your marriage to David," she declared, her disapproval evident in her demeanor. Perplexed, David interjected, seeking clarity. "Why?" he pressed, prompting his mother to elaborate. Fixing me with a steely gaze, she broached the crux of her objection. "Your inability to bear children," she stated bluntly, laying bare the very fear I had hoped to avoid. Though prepared for reproach, the directness of her words pierced me deeply, leaving me momentarily speechless. "You comprehend, don't you? David is poised to inherit the company. It's only natural that we expect his wife to bear an heir. Marrying someone incapable of fulfilling that role is out of the question," she asserted, her tone unwavering in its refusal to accept our union. Aware of David's imminent ascension to the helm of the family company, I understood the weighty expectations placed upon him, particularly the desire for him to produce an heir. Yet David's proposal to me had been made with full knowledge of these circumstances. While the prospect of not having children with him weighed heavily on my heart, our decision to marry had been a mutual one, made despite these challenges. Thus, his mother's words struck a painful chord within me, their sharpness magnified by the stark reality they laid bare. "It was me who insisted that it didn't matter," David interjected, his defense of me unwavering. "Please, mother, refrain from laying blame on Catherine. Our choices should not be disregarded in this manner," he implored, coming to my defense when words failed me. Even David's father, visibly perturbed by his wife's harsh words, expressed his discontent. "How could you utter such words?" he admonished her. Despite their protests, his mother remained resolute, her stance unchanged. "I speak the truth," she asserted defiantly before excusing herself from the table, signaling an end to the discussion. Although our conversation yielded no resolution that day, it failed to shake our steadfast commitment to each other. Determined to formalize our commitment despite his mother's resistance, we opted to register our marriage with his father's blessing. Recognizing that waiting for her approval might indefinitely delay our union, we took the decisive step forward. "My mother's objections hold no sway over us," David assured me. "I'm the one who desires this marriage. Let's remain patient. She'll come around eventually." Thus, David and I became husband and wife, yet his mother remained steadfast in her refusal to acknowledge our union. "I'll never accept this. I refuse to attend any ceremony," she declared adamantly, escalating the tension further. In light of her unwavering stance, we postponed the wedding ceremony, clinging to the hope of winning her acceptance before celebrating our love publicly. Day after day, his father endeavored to sway her opinion, while David and I persisted in our appeals, pouring our hearts into each plea. Despite our efforts, her resolve remained unyielding. In a bid to soften her stance, my parents also visited his family numerous times, joining the chorus of voices imploring her to reconsider. Even some of David's relatives weighed in, urging her to embrace our union. Finally, after an onslaught of earnest appeals from all quarters, she relented. At long last, we could proceed with the wedding ceremony, our hearts brimming with gratitude for the collective efforts that led to this moment of acceptance. Despite lingering discontent, David and I pressed on with our wedding preparations and finally settled on a date, marking it a year from the day we officially registered our marriage, effectively our inaugural wedding anniversary. As the long-awaited day approached, a palpable sense of relief washed over us, culminating in the arrival of our wedding day itself. Filled with an overwhelming mix of emotions, I stood on the brink of tears, elated at the prospect of finally donning the wedding dress I had nearly abandoned. It felt surreal, like the culmination of a cherished dream. The ceremony unfolded seamlessly within the sacred confines of the church, setting the stage for a joyous reception. Surrounded by the warm embrace of well-wishers, I found myself enveloped in a cocoon of happiness. It was all thanks to David, whose unwavering support had guided me through moments of doubt and self-doubt, reminding me of my worthiness of love and marriage. Watching David, resplendent in his finery, exuding an aura of strength and reliability, filled my heart with an indescribable sense of contentment. Yet, as the festivities progressed and we prepared for a brief interlude, I caught sight of his mother ascending the stage, evidently seeking permission to address the gathering. And thus she embarked on her own discourse. "Thank you all for joining us in celebrating my son's wedding today," began the mother-in-law, her words slicing through the air like a chilling wind. "The truth is, the bride is unable to conceive, and I've harbored reservations about their union from the start." Her words struck me like a thunderbolt, freezing me in place as I contemplated the audacity of her disclosure on this joyous occasion. The once lively atmosphere in the venue dissolved into a stifling silence. "However," she continued, undeterred, "my son was adamant, and so I reluctantly acquiesced to their marriage." In the midst of the hushed hall, her voice resonated with a chilling finality. Despite David's attempts to intervene, his mother clung to the microphone, forging ahead with her tirade. "You see, I may never have the joy of holding a grandchild in my arms. Can you fathom such a sorrowful predicament? Truly, I fail to comprehend his choice in a partner like this." Stunned by her relentless onslaught of cruelty, I struggled to find my voice as David grappled with his own emotions beside me. Then, with a callous laugh, she delivered the final blow. "Yes, as you can plainly see, my daughter-in-law is barren, but she's successful in her career, so I reluctantly consented to their union. Ha ha ha." Her laughter reverberated through the hall, a bitter echo of her disdain. As her gaze bore into me, she delivered one last venomous barb. "You ought to be grateful. This day owes its existence to me." With a smug satisfaction evident on her face, the mother-in-law resumed her seat, her disgraceful speech concluded. Had there ever been a more offensive display? Stunned into silence, I scarcely registered the murmurs swirling around me. Urged by David and the venue staff, I was guided out of the hall, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and indignation. Once inside the dressing room, the floodgates of suppressed emotions burst open. Anger, sorrow, a profound sense of disappointment at the desecration of our long-awaited ceremony. Each emotion crashed over me in relentless waves, threatening to engulf me entirely. I never want to lay eyes on that woman again. I refuse to share a space with someone so callous, I declared, my voice trembling with raw emotion as I shed the wedding attire, opting instead for the comfort of my own clothes. "This is enough. I'm going home," I announced to David, my resolve unyielding as I stormed out of the dressing room, my footsteps echoing with determination. "Catherine, please, just wait." David's pleas fell on deaf ears as I hastily hailed a waiting taxi at the venue's entrance. "Take me home," I instructed the driver, my voice laced with a fervent urgency. Humiliated and incensed by my mother-in-law's public humiliation, all I desired was to escape from the scene of the ordeal as swiftly as possible. Our new home, just a brief 5-minute drive from the wedding venue, provided a sanctuary amidst the storm of emotions that engulfed me. Stepping across the threshold, the floodgates I had desperately held shut burst open, tears streaming down my cheeks unchecked. Never had I imagined I would endure such cruelty on what should have been the happiest day of my life. The joy of yesterday had swiftly transformed into the bitterest despair, leaving me reeling in disbelief. It wasn't a choice to bear my infertility, let alone to have it laid bare before a crowd of onlookers, especially on such a sacred occasion. As I struggled to compose myself, David entered. "Catherine, I'm truly sorry. Please forgive me. I never anticipated my mother's hurtful words. I'm sorry I couldn't shield you from her cruelty." David's voice was laden with remorse as he bowed deeply before me, seeking my forgiveness. He explained that as the groom, he felt powerless to confront his mother's deplorable behavior. Aware of David's inherent decency, I harbored no ill will toward him. It was his mother who bore the blame for this affront, not him. "Please, Catherine, let's return to the wedding. I've asked my father to keep my mother away from the venue. They're occupied with the guests during the dress change, and we still have time to salvage the reception." "I refuse to let this day end in ruin," David implored, his earnest plea reaching me through the haze of my turmoil. I nodded in acquiescence, choosing to place my trust in David's assurances. I couldn't bear to inflict further pain upon him, my staunch supporter and understanding companion. Moreover, the thought of tarnishing the reception we had meticulously planned together weighed heavily on my conscience. Offering David my apology for hastily retreating, we embarked on the journey back to the venue. In the taxi, our hands intertwined, a silent vow passing between us to weather this storm and see our wedding reception through to its rightful conclusion. Upon our return to the family waiting room, we found my mother-in-law surrounded by relatives, her exhaustion palpable as she bore the weight of their collective reproach. Catching sight of my presence, she approached me with an air of contrition. "Oh, Catherine, I'm terribly sorry. Can we simply pretend that dreadful incident never occurred?" Her voice took on a pleading tone, her head bowed slightly in a gesture of supplication. It was a stark departure from the smug countenance she had worn at the reception. "Why? How can you even suggest such a thing after the humiliation you inflicted in front of everyone? How can you expect us to simply forget?" My anger flared anew at her audacity, her attempt at reconciliation ringing hollow in my ears. The notion of forgiveness felt like an insult after the disgrace she had wrought. Why seek forgiveness now when you never truly accepted me to begin with? If you were so opposed, why not simply let things be? I voiced my refusal to acquiesce to her plea, my resolve unyielding as I prepared to return to the ceremony. "Don't be like that. I'm apologizing, so why won't you forgive me?" My mother-in-law's words hung in the air, laced with frustration and confusion. "I had no idea that one of your relatives was a key client of our company. It turns out, my maternal uncle oversees a significant client of my father-in-law's company. While I was away, he gave mother-in-law quite the dressing down. He even hinted at severing the business transaction. Thanks to my father-in-law's desperate apologies, the situation was barely kept under control." In that moment, clarity dawned upon me like a sudden revelation. Mother-in-law's apology wasn't born of genuine remorse but rather self-preservation. I was rendered speechless by the realization of her motives. It was then that David, who had observed our exchange in silence, finally interjected. "Mom, is that your idea of an apology? Aren't you disrespecting Catherine too much? And you're apologizing to her simply because you were reprimanded by a client?" David's voice, usually calm and composed, rang out with an uncharacteristic edge of frustration. My mother-in-law, taken aback by his sudden outburst, stared blankly in response. "Do you comprehend the magnitude of the pain you've caused Catherine, Mom?" David's voice rang out, filled with a raw intensity that echoed through the room. "You exposed her most sensitive issue in front of everyone at our wedding. As a human being, that's the lowest of lows, regardless of the circumstances. It's inexcusable. You casually brought up someone's health struggles like it was nothing." David's words surged forth, an unrelenting torrent of pent-up emotions directed squarely at his mother. He spared no detail, laying bare the hurt she had inflicted upon me, time and time again, wielding my infertility as a weapon. Today's egregious display at the reception had been the final straw. David's gaze bore into his mother with a mixture of disgust and disappointment. "I'm through with you. Consider yourself disowned if you can't accept Catherine as my wife. That's your issue to grapple with. Your words hold no sway over us. Our family's affairs are no concern of outsiders." With unwavering resolve, David severed ties with his mother in a single, decisive proclamation. There was no ambiguity in his declaration. He wanted no part in her life from this moment forward. As far as he was concerned, she was no longer his mother. "David, please, don't say such things. I want to celebrate with you. Let's not dwell on anger, all right? I won't utter another word. Let's try to salvage the mood and enjoy the rest of the wedding together, shall we?" His mother's complexion paled at David's words, her attempts to gauge his reaction met with futility. Despite her frantic efforts to placate him, it was evident that nothing she could say would sway David's resolve. "Today isn't just about me, it's about Catherine too. We're a team. We're inseparable. Disrespecting Catherine is akin to disrespecting me. I understand that you have no desire to celebrate our union, so I suggest you leave now." David's tone was unwavering, his words cutting through the air with an icy precision. Her apologies rang hollow. Mere attempts at self-preservation devoid of any genuine remorse towards me. David, with a merciless resolve, ordered her to depart, asserting that I was his sole family. "I can't believe this, David," his mother murmured in disbelief, her expression a mixture of shock and bewilderment. Clearly caught off guard by her son's unequivocal rejection, she found herself standing alone, alienated by David, me, David's father, and the rest of the relatives. With no allies left and facing the harsh reality of her situation, she reluctantly conceded defeat, her only recourse being to retreat from the scene. Once she had departed, I swiftly changed into a fresh dress, taking David's hand as we made our way back to the venue, united in our resolve. Though they remained unaware of the turmoil that had transpired, the guests greeted our return with a warm round of applause. It was evident that they had sensed the gravity of the situation and graciously awaited our return. I was deeply moved by their understanding and grateful for the comforting embrace of their warm reception. With my mother-in-law absent, the wedding reception flowed seamlessly. As David and I prepared to deliver our closing remarks, we took a moment to extend a heartfelt apology for the disruption caused earlier. With that, we successfully wrapped up the festivities without further interruption. True to David's resolve, we made the decision to cut all ties with my mother-in-law. David changed his contact details, ensuring no further communication could reach us. He even suggested we relocate, despite our recent settlement into our new home. Recognizing David's unwavering determination, I agreed to the move. The relocation expenses were graciously covered by my father-in-law, citing the troubles caused by my mother-in-law. With his support, we swiftly made the transition to our new residence. Once our move was finalized, my father-in-law took decisive action and served my mother-in-law with divorce papers. He, too, had grown weary of her mistreatment towards me, and the incident at the wedding was the final straw. Although a sincere apology managed to salvage our relationship with our uncle, who also happened to be a business associate, he had reached his limit with my mother-in-law's behavior. Consequently, she was expelled from the family home, left to forge a solitary path forward. Since David and I cut ties with my mother-in-law, we've been left in the dark about her whereabouts and well-being. From what we've heard through whispers and hearsay, it seems her disgraceful behavior at the wedding left her with no familial support. She's said to be enduring a solitary and difficult existence, scraping by in a modest apartment and working multiple part-time jobs from dawn till dusk just to make ends meet. Meanwhile, David and I are relishing in the tranquility of our married life. Though we hadn't been blessed with children, we find solace and contentment in our companionship. We're confident that as long as we continue to cherish and support each other, our bond will only grow stronger with each passing day. With this unwavering belief, we face our future hand in hand, filled with hope and anticipation for the life we're building together.
While I was away on a business trip, my husband secretly moved his mistress into our home. When I returned early, I caught them red-handed in our bedroom. They overpowered me, locked me away, and demanded my house and luxury car. But they never saw my next move coming. It ruined them forever. If you had asked me a few years ago, I would have told you that my life was perfect. My name is Ava Parker, and I am 36 years old. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and I have built a successful career as a real estate agent. I worked hard to get here, years of effort, long nights, and pushing through obstacles. I own my own house, a luxury car, and had financial security. I believed I had everything a woman could ask for. And I thought I had a loving husband, Ryan. Ryan and I had been married for 6 years, but we had known each other longer. We met at an event where I was helping clients find properties, and he was there as a car dealer trying to promote his business. He had this charming personality, a smooth talker, and knew how to make a woman feel special. Back then, I admired his energy, his laughter, and the way he always made things fun. He was 2 years younger than me, but I didn't care. Age wasn't important. I believed in love, trust, and partnership. At first, things were great. He was attentive, caring, and affectionate. We traveled together, shared our dreams, and built a life I thought would last forever. I didn't mind that I earned more than him. I believed we were a team, and what was mine was his too. But over time, Ryan changed. He quit his job as a car dealer because he said he was tired of working for others. Instead, he became obsessed with social media, trying to become an influencer. He spent all his time posting videos, chasing trends, and trying to gain followers. He promised me that one day, he'd be successful, and we'd never have to worry about money again. Months turned into years, and nothing changed. He wasn't making real money. Instead, he became lazy, selfish, and completely dependent on me. I paid for everything, the bills, the groceries, the house, the car, the vacations. He barely lifted a finger at home. He wouldn't clean, cook, or even take care of small things like fixing the Wi-Fi. If I ever asked him for help, he'd wave me off and say, "Relax, babe, you can afford a maid." I tried to talk to him, reason with him, but he always had an excuse. "Ava, you don't understand how social media works. It takes time. You're so controlling. Just let me do my thing. Why are you always nagging me? You knew who I was when you married me." I still held on, hoping he'd change, but deep down, I was growing exhausted. And then came the biggest betrayal of all. For a long time, I had this gut feeling that something wasn't right. Ryan had become distant, spending hours locked in a room, whispering on his phone. He started going out late at night, claiming he had meetings with brands and sponsors. He suddenly became secretive with his phone, turning the screen away when I walked by. Whenever I asked, he'd brush it off. "You're overthinking, Ava. Stop acting like I'm some kind of criminal. You're too busy with work to even spend time with me. Why do you care now?" I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust my husband. But the truth had a way of coming out. One night, I was organizing paperwork for our home when I found a medical bill tucked away in a drawer. At first, I thought it was an old bill of mine, but when I looked closer, my heart stopped. It was a hospital bill for a child's birth, dated 5 years ago. The father's name? Ryan Parker. My hands trembled. I stared at the paper, reading it over and over, hoping I was wrong. My husband had a child? A 5-year-old child. I felt like my whole world had shattered. The man I had supported, trusted, and loved had been living a double life. I had no idea who this child's mother was, but I knew one thing. I was done being a fool. The next morning, I confronted Ryan. I held up the hospital bill and demanded, "Explain this." For the first time in our marriage, he had nothing to say. He looked at the bill, then at me, and his face went pale. "Abe, he stammered, but his silence told me everything. "You lied to me." My voice shook. "You had a child with another woman and kept it a secret." Then, just like that, his guilt disappeared, and a smirk appeared on his face. "So what if I did?" he said coldly. "It's none of your business." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "None of my business. I'm your wife." He sighed and leaned back against the couch. "Listen, Ava, we've had a good run, but let's face it, you're always working, and we barely see each other. Maybe it's time to move on."
Move on.
Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You disgust me, Ryan." That was the last conversation we had before I left for my 10-day business tour in New York. I needed to get away, clear my head, and plan my next steps. I couldn't stay married to a man who had betrayed me like this. But fate had other plans. Just 2 days later, my business trip was suddenly canceled. My company had to reschedule the meetings, so I booked an early flight home. I didn't tell Ryan I was coming back. I didn't want to see his face. I just wanted to pack my things and figure out my next move. But when I walked into my house that night, I never expected what I saw next. There, standing in my living room, was Ryan, and next to him, a young woman with dark hair, holding the hand of a small child. They were living in my house, sleeping in my bed, using my money. And that was the moment everything changed forever. I stepped into my house, expecting silence, but instead, I heard laughter. At first, I thought maybe Ryan had company over, some friends, maybe. But then I saw them. Ryan was standing in my living room, relaxed, laughing at something. And next to him, a woman, young, dark-haired, and holding the hand of a little boy. The woman was comfortably dressed in my robe, her bare feet resting on my coffee table, and the child had toys spread all over my expensive rug. It felt like I had walked into a nightmare. I froze in place, my suitcase still in my hand. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Ryan turned, and for a split second, I saw shock flash across his face. But then, just as quickly, he smirked.
"Oh,
you're back early." His voice was so casual, like I had just come home from a walk. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My home, the one I built with my hard work, was being used like a hotel, for my cheating husband and his mistress. Who is she? I finally managed to say, my voice shaking with fury. The woman stood up, smirking just like Ryan. She had no shame. I'm Sophie, she said smoothly. Ryan's girlfriend. And this is our son, Liam. My whole body turned cold. Our son? I looked at the boy. He was 5 years old. The same age as the child from the hospital bill I had found. The truth hit me so hard that I staggered back. Ryan had a whole family behind my back. You brought them into my house? I gasped, my hands shaking. Ryan rolled his eyes, acting bored. Relax, Ava. You were gone for work. We needed a place to stay. You needed a place to stay? My voice rose. You have a child with another woman, and instead of being a man and telling me, you sneak her and the kid into my home? Sophie laughed. Oh, Ava. Don't act so innocent. You were never around. Ryan and I, well, we've been together for a while now. I could barely see straight. All those nights Ryan disappeared, all the times he lied about meetings and business deals. It was her. You cheating bastard, I spat at Ryan. I gave you everything. I paid for this house, this life. I supported you when you had nothing, and this is how you repay me? Ryan let out a sigh, completely unfazed. Yeah, well. You had your fun. It's time for me to take my share now. My share? I repeated, barely able to process what he was saying. Ryan stepped closer, his smirk widening. We might as well make this simple, Ava. Sign the house and car over to me, and we'll be out of your way. I laughed bitterly. Are you out of your mind? Why the hell would I do that? Sophie's eyes darkened, and in a flash, she grabbed my arm. Before I could react, Ryan yanked my suitcase out of my hand and kicked the door shut. You're going to sign the papers, Ryan said, his voice cold now. I tried to pull away, but Sophie's grip was tight. Ryan, let me go. No, he said simply. Not until you give me what I want. That's when it hit me. They weren't going to let me leave. I felt my stomach drop. Ryan grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard. We're not playing games, Ava. We're done pretending. I struggled, my heart pounding in fear. You're insane. Sophie shoved me backward, and before I could react, I was pushed into the guest bedroom. Ryan slammed the door behind me, and I heard the lock click. I ran to the door and banged on it. Let me out. From the other side, I heard Sophie's mocking voice. Just sign the transfer papers, Ava. It's easier that way. I screamed in rage, pounding on the door. They had locked me in my own house, trying to force me to hand over everything I owned. I looked around the room. No phone. No way to call for help. My body trembled in panic. How long would they keep me here? What if they hurt me worse? And then, I heard Ryan's voice outside the door. You've got two choices, Ava. Sign the papers, or we make your life a living hell. I sank to the floor, tears burning in my eyes. I felt helpless, but I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to give up. Then I heard something that made my heart stop. Sophie said, and if she doesn't sign, we'll have to make her. Ryan's voice dropped into a low whisper, but I still heard him. Yeah, we'll make her. I shivered. They were serious. They were going to force me one way or another. My mind raced. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to fight back. And then, just as I was losing hope, I heard something outside the house. A voice. A woman's voice. It was Lisa, my best friend, my neighbor. Ava? I jumped to my feet and banged on the wall as hard as I could. Lisa, help me. Outside, silence. Then I heard her footsteps running away. And I prayed, please, please let her do something. Minutes passed. Then, from outside, I heard it. Sirens. Loud. Blazing. Getting closer. Ryan and Sophie panicked. The cops. The cops are here. Sophie shrieked. Shut up. We can't let them find her. Ryan hissed. I heard them running through the house, trying to escape. Then suddenly, boom. The front door burst open. Chicago police. Hands in the air. The sound of rushing footsteps filled the house. A moment later, the lock on my door clicked, and the door swung open. A police officer stood there, looking at me with concern. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I burst into tears. I had been trapped, helpless, and scared, but now I was free. The officers rushed after Ryan and Sophie, but they were already gone. They had escaped.
For now.
But I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not after what they had done. I stepped out of the room, my hands clenched into fists. I was going to make them pay, no matter what it took. The moment I stepped out of that room, my entire body was shaking. I wasn't sure if it was from rage, fear, or relief. Maybe all three. The police officers guided me out of the house, their voices calm and reassuring, but my mind was elsewhere. Ryan and Sophie had escaped. Lisa ran up to me the moment I stepped outside, her face full of worry.
Ava.
"Oh my God, are you okay?" I could barely speak. My throat felt raw from screaming for help. The moment she hugged me, I broke down. "You saved me, Lisa," I whispered. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't called the police." She pulled back, gripping my shoulders. "I knew something was wrong when I heard you screaming." "Ava, what did they do to you?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. They wanted me to sign over the house and the car. When I refused, they locked me in a room. They were going to force me. My voice cracked at the last part. "Ryan, he hit me." Lisa's eyes flashed with fury. "That son of a..." The officer beside me interrupted. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come down to the station to file an official report. We need to put out a warrant for Ryan Parker and Sophie Mills." I nodded without hesitation. I had spent years supporting that man, believing in him, hoping he'd change.
And in return?
He cheated, betrayed, and tried to steal everything I built.
No.
He wasn't getting away with it. At the station, I told them everything. From the moment I met Ryan, how he changed after marriage, how I discovered his affair, and how he and Sophie trapped me in my own home, demanding I hand over my property. The police were horrified. "You're lucky your neighbor acted fast," one officer told me. This could have been much worse. I swallowed hard. I knew what he meant. Ryan and Sophie were getting desperate. If Lisa hadn't heard me, they might have done something even worse. But now it was my turn. I wasn't just going to let them run away and start a new life on my money. Ryan thought he could break me, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. The very next day, the police issued a public warrant for Ryan and Sophie. Their faces were all over the news, and their names were posted on crime alerts online. They thought they could hide, but I knew Ryan too well. He was too arrogant to disappear quietly. And I was right. 2 days later, I got a call from one of the officers.
"We've found them," he said.
A woman recognized them at a cafe in downtown Chicago. "They're trying to act normal, but we're moving in now." I rushed to the station, my heart racing. By the time I arrived, it was over. They had been arrested in public, humiliated in front of dozens of people. Ryan had tried to run, but he wasn't fast enough. Sophie had screamed and fought, but in the end, they were dragged away in handcuffs. When I saw them sitting in that holding cell, it was Ryan who looked at me first. His face was filled with pure hatred. "You set me up," he snarled. I tilted my head. "Oh, I thought you said I was overthinking things, that I was too busy with work to notice what you were doing." His jaw tightened. "You ruined me." I laughed softly. "You ruined yourself, Ryan. I'm just the one who made sure the world saw it." Sophie suddenly lunged forward, her eyes wild with rage. "You think you've won? You think putting us in here changes anything?" I looked at her with nothing but disgust. "You came into my home. You tried to steal from me. You trapped me, threatened me, and laughed in my face." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Now, you're exactly where you deserve to be." She screamed something at me, but the guards dragged her away. I turned back to Ryan, giving him one final glance. "I gave you everything," I whispered, "and you threw it all away. Enjoy your new life, Ryan. I hear prison food is terrible." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. He knew. This was the end. I walked out of that station lighter than I had felt in years. The nightmare was finally over. But I wasn't done yet. The court case was still ahead, and I was going to make sure they paid for every single thing they did to me. And I wasn't going to stop until they were locked away for a long, long time. The courtroom was cold and sterile, yet every seat was filled. Reporters, strangers, even some familiar faces from my past, all watching, waiting to see how this story would end. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands steady, my heart calm. This was it. The final step to ensure that Ryan and Sophie faced justice for what they had done. Across from me, Ryan looked worn out, defeated. His usually well-groomed hair was a mess, his confidence shattered. Sophie sat beside him, her once smug expression replaced with something close to fear. The judge entered, and silence filled the room. Ryan's lawyer stood up first, trying to paint me as the villain. Ava Parker is a successful real estate agent. She had financial control in this marriage. My client was simply left without options. I nearly laughed out loud. Without options? I finally spoke, my voice calm but firm. He had every option. He could have worked, contributed, been a husband. Instead, he chose to cheat, steal, and abuse. Ryan glared at me, but he knew he had nothing left to argue. I laid out everything. The years of financial support, the secret affair, and their child. The night they trapped me in my own home. The threats, the violence, the police rescue. The evidence was overwhelming. Lisa testified. She told the court how she heard my screams and called 911. The police officers testified. They explained how they found me locked away, how Ryan and Sophie fled like criminals. The medical report proved Ryan had hit me. Bank records showed he had drained money from our joint accounts. Security footage from the cafe showed their arrest. Sophie lost control first. "You don't understand," she screamed at the judge. "We deserve that money. Ava has everything. A career, a house, a car. She wouldn't even notice if we took a little." The judge raised an eyebrow. "A little? You attempted to steal her home and her assets while holding her against her will." Sophie sat back, her mouth snapping shut. Then it was Ryan's turn. "Your Honor, I made mistakes," he said, his voice forced, trying to sound pitiful. "But I just wanted a chance. Ava never loved me. She only loved her work." "Objection," my lawyer cut in. "This is irrelevant." "Overruled," the judge said. "Mr. Parker, you are not the victim here." Ryan looked at me, his desperation finally showing. "Ava, please," he said, his voice lower. "You're really going to send me to prison?" I tilted my head, staring at the man I once thought I loved. "You had every chance to do better, Ryan. Every chance to be better. Instead, you threw it all away. I don't owe you anything." His face twisted into pure hatred. "You ruined my life." I finally let out a small, satisfied smile.
"No, Ryan."
"You ruined yours." The judge didn't take long to make the ruling. Ryan and Sophie were found guilty on multiple counts.
Fraud.
Domestic abuse. Unlawful imprisonment. Attempted theft. Ryan was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Sophie, because of her active involvement, got 8 years. The moment the sentence was read, Ryan slammed his fists on the table, shouting, "You're a monster, Ava. I hope you rot alone." Sophie screamed, trying to lunge at me, but the bailiffs held her back. I simply stood up, collected my things, and walked out of the courtroom, free. For the first time in years, I could breathe. In the days that followed, I made a clean break from my past. I sold the house where all the bad memories lived. I got rid of the car Ryan had once begged to drive. I moved into a brand new luxury apartment in downtown Chicago. Lisa came over one night with wine, sitting on my new couch with a grin. "You did it," she said, raising her glass. "You got your revenge." I swirled my drink, thinking for a moment. "It wasn't revenge," I said finally. "It was justice." Lisa laughed. "Call it whatever you want. The important thing is you're free." I looked out the window, the city lights glowing below. She was right. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't trapped in a toxic marriage. I was finally free, and I would never let anyone take that from me again. My husband was on a business trip when my manipulative mother-in-law and sister-in-law threw my belongings out of the house, blaming me for being an outsider. Their next plan was to sell my condo and force me onto the streets to beg, but my secret revenge ruined their plan. My name is Harper Carter, and if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes, the ones you trust the most are the ones who will betray you in ways you never imagined. But let me start from the beginning. I was 8 years old when my life shattered. My parents died in a tragic car accident, leaving me alone in a world I wasn't ready to face. The days after their funeral were a blur. Relatives whispered about who would take me, but no one actually wanted me. I remember sitting on the porch of our house, staring at the road, hoping my parents would somehow walk back through the door. Then came the Hendersons, my elderly neighbors. They weren't related to me by blood, but they saw something in me that no one else did. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson took me in, fed me, clothed me, and most importantly, loved me. We didn't have much, but we were happy. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, in a small but cozy house filled with warmth. Mr. Henderson was a retired schoolteacher, and he would help me with my homework every night. Mrs. Henderson was a gentle woman who baked the best apple pie. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. I had a home. I had parents again. But fate had other plans. When I was 20, just as I was preparing for college, tragedy struck again. A fire broke out in our house, late one night. By the time I woke up to the smell of smoke, it was too late. The firefighters pulled me out just in time, but the Hendersons didn't make it. In the span of a few hours, I lost the only family I had left. The house was gone. My life was gone. I had no choice but to sell the small piece of land it stood on. With the little money I got, I packed up and moved to Miami, Florida, determined to start over. I enrolled in college to study finance, hoping that if I could understand money, maybe I could control my future a little better. Those years were tough. I worked 2 jobs, barely slept, and had no one to rely on. But I kept going, telling myself that I would never be helpless again. After graduating, I landed a great job as a financial consultant. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of security. For the first time, I felt like I was in control of my life. Then I met Ryan Carter. It was at a business event. I wasn't looking for love, but there he was, charming, ambitious, and full of life. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. We talked about everything and nothing, and by the end of the night, I didn't want to say goodbye. 2 years later, he proposed in the most Ryan way possible. No grand gestures, no audience. Just the 2 of us on the couch watching an old movie. He pulled a ring from his pocket and said, "Marry me," like it was the simplest decision in the world. And for me, it was. We got married and built a life together in Miami. We weren't rich, but we were happy. For the first time since I was a child, I felt safe. But happiness never seems to last long in my life. One evening, Ryan came home with big news. He had been offered an international business opportunity that could change our future. The catch? He had to leave for a whole year. It wasn't ideal, but I encouraged him to take it. After all, we had our whole lives ahead of us. What was 1 year apart? What I didn't know was that this 1 year would change everything. Shortly after Ryan left, his parents, George and Margaret Lancaster, fell ill. His mother, Margaret, called me in tears, begging me to come to Orlando to help them. I didn't hesitate. They were family. I packed my bags, arranged to work remotely, and moved into their house in the suburbs of Orlando. At first, things were fine. George was weak, but still had his spirit, and Margaret was grateful for my help. I managed their medications, cooked, cleaned, and made sure they had everything they needed. I even sent money from the rent I earned on my Miami condo to help with their expenses. Then, one day, Nicole Palmer walked through the door. Nicole was Margaret's daughter from a previous relationship. I had never met her before, but Ryan had warned me about her. She had a history of trouble, laziness, and manipulation, but I had no idea just how much damage she could do. From the moment she arrived, she made it clear. I was an outsider in her mother's house. She didn't even pretend to be nice. She ignored me, made passive-aggressive remarks, and dismissed everything I did. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself she was just adjusting to the situation. But then, Margaret started changing too. She stopped thanking me for my help. She became colder, more distant. And every time Nicole whispered to her behind my back, I knew something was being said about me. I had no proof, but I could feel it. The walls of the house were closing in on me. And then George passed away. Ryan flew home for the funeral, and I finally had a moment of relief, thinking that with him back, things would get better. But I couldn't bring myself to tell him what was happening. Not yet. He had just lost his father, and I didn't want to add to his pain. After the funeral, Ryan left again, promising he'd be back as soon as he could. But the moment his plane took off, Nicole made her move. One day, I came home from a grocery run to find all my belongings dumped in the garage. My clothes, my shoes, everything. I walked inside, furious. What the hell is going on? Nicole sat at the kitchen table, smirking. Oh, don't look so shocked, Harper. This isn't your house. You're just a guest. Margaret stood beside her, silent. She didn't even look at me. That night, I checked my bank account and felt my stomach drop. Someone had drained a large amount of money from my account. I confronted Margaret, but she acted completely indifferent. You're exaggerating, she said. We needed the money. That was the moment I knew I was no longer family. I was their target, and I had to get out before things got worse. But Nicole wasn't going to let me leave that easily. I should have left that night. I should have packed my bags and walked out the door. But a part of me still clung to the idea that maybe things would get better. Maybe Margaret would come to her senses. Maybe I was overreacting. I wasn't. The next morning, I found Nicole lounging on the couch, flipping through a stack of my bank statements. My bank statements. I snatched them from her hands. What the hell, Nicole? She smirked, completely unfazed. Relax. I was just trying to understand how someone like you managed to own a Miami condo. Must have been nice, huh? I felt a chill run down my spine. Stay out of my things. She leaned back, sipping coffee like she owned the house. You don't get it, do you? You don't belong here. You never did. I clenched my fists. I'm here because your mother asked for my help. Nicole rolled her eyes.
Right.
And now you've done enough. Why don't you be useful and sign over that Miami condo to Mom? She's struggling, you know. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about making me uncomfortable. This was about money. My money. I turned to Margaret, who had just walked into the room. Margaret, tell me this isn't true. You're not trying to take my home from me. Margaret wouldn't even look at me. She just stood there, wringing her hands. It's not like that, dear. We just thought you wouldn't mind helping out. Helping out? They had already drained thousands from my account behind my back. Now they wanted me to give them everything I had. I shook my head. Absolutely not. Nicole's smirk vanished. Her eyes darkened. You really think you're better than us, don't you? I didn't answer. I grabbed my bag, stormed up the stairs, and locked my bedroom door. My hands were shaking. I needed to leave. Tonight. But Nicole had other plans. That night, as I packed, my bedroom door burst open so hard it slammed against the wall. Before I could react, Nicole grabbed me by the arm and shoved me against the dresser. The edge of the wood dug into my back as she leaned in close, her breath hot and furious against my face. You think you can just walk away? She hissed. You owe us. I shoved her back, but she was stronger than I expected. She grabbed a fistful of my shirt and yanked me forward, causing me to stumble. My head smacked against the nightstand, sending a sharp pain through my skull. I tasted blood. Margaret stood in the hallway, watching. Not stopping her. Just watching. That was the moment I knew I was on my own. Nicole stood over me, breathing heavily, waiting for me to fight back. But I wasn't going to play her game. I wasn't going to break, not in front of her. Slowly, I wiped the blood from my lip and forced myself to stand. You're making a mistake, Nicole. She laughed, shaking her head.
No, Harper.
The mistake was letting you in here in the first place. I stared at Margaret, hoping, praying, for some kind of humanity. Some sign that she knew this was wrong. But her expression was cold. Empty. I was nothing to her now. I walked past them, ignoring the throbbing in my head, and locked myself in the bathroom. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone. I needed to get out of here. But then, I heard voices outside the door. She won't leave, Nicole said. Not unless we force her. My heart started pounding. Margaret's voice was hesitant. Nicole, maybe we're going too far. No, Nicole snapped.
She's weak.
She'll cave. I backed away from the door. They weren't just trying to intimidate me anymore. They were planning something worse. I needed proof. I hit record on my phone and pressed it against the door. Their voices spilled into the tiny space. She'll never sell unless she has no other option, Nicole said. We just need to keep pushing.
She'll break.
And once she does, we'll take everything. I had enough. I grabbed my bag, shoved my phone inside, and quietly unlocked the bathroom window. I wasn't going to wait around for whatever they had planned next. I was done playing nice. I climbed out into the night, feet hitting the cold grass. I didn't look back. I ran. The second my feet hit the grass, I sprinted through the backyard, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The night air was cold, but my skin burned with adrenaline. I didn't care about anything except getting away. I reached the street and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking as I called a cab. I knew I couldn't go back inside for my car, not without facing Nicole again. As I stood under a flickering streetlight, waiting, I kept my eyes on the house. I half expected Nicole to come charging out after me, but the door stayed closed. Maybe she thought she had scared me into submission. She had no idea what was coming. The moment I got in the cab, I called Ryan. He answered groggily. He was still overseas, and it was the middle of the night where he was. Harper. His voice was thick with sleep. What's wrong? I took a shaky breath. Ryan, I need you to listen carefully. Your mother and Nicole, they've been stealing from me. They drained my account. And tonight, Nicole attacked me.
Silence.
Then, his voice turned deadly serious. Where are you now? In a cab. I'm going straight to Miami. Good. Don't stop. I'm booking the next flight home. For the first time that night, I let out a shaky breath of relief. I wasn't alone. By the time I got back to my apartment in Miami, I felt like I had just escaped a war zone. I locked the door, closed the curtains, and immediately backed up all the recordings on my laptop. I replayed Nicole's words over and over. She'll never sell unless she has no other option. We just need to keep pushing.
She'll break.
And once she does, we'll take everything. I wasn't going to break. I wasn't going to let them win. The next day, I called my bank. I reported the unauthorized transactions, froze my accounts, and filed a fraud report against Margaret and Nicole. Then I went to the police. I played the recording, showed them the bruises on my arms, and filed an assault charge against Nicole. It felt surreal, like I was finally taking my power back. 3 days later, Ryan arrived home. The second he stepped inside, I collapsed into his arms, finally letting go of everything I had been holding in. He held me tightly, his anger barely contained. I should have been there, he murmured, kissing the top of my head. You're here now, I whispered. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, we drove back to Orlando.
Not to stay.
Not to make peace, but to end this once and for all. We pulled up in front of the house, and just as I expected, Nicole was outside on the porch, looking smug as ever. She stood when she saw me. Well, look who's back. Did you finally? Ryan stormed past her, straight into the house. Mom, he bellowed. Get out here.
Now.
Margaret stepped into the living room, looking nervous. She glanced at me, then at Ryan. Ryan, honey, Don't, Ryan snapped. I know everything. Harper told me what's been happening. The money you stole, the way you treated her, how you stood there and let Nicole attack my wife. Nicole folded her arms. Oh, please. She's overreacting. Ryan turned on her so fast that she actually took a step back. Shut up. His voice was cold, controlled, but his fury filled the entire room. Nicole scoffed. What are you going to do, huh? Call the cops. Ryan's smile was ice. Too late. They're already on their way. Nicole's face drained of color. Margaret gasped. Ryan, no. You made your choice, Mom. His voice shook with emotion, but he didn't waver. You picked Nicole over me. Over Harper. And now you're going to pay for it. Margaret turned to me, her eyes pleading. Harper, sweetheart, you wouldn't do this to family. I stared at her for a long moment. Then, I spoke calmly, firmly, without hesitation. You were never my family. Sirens blared outside. And for the first time since I met her, Nicole Palmer looked scared. As the police cars pulled up in front of the house, Nicole's cocky smirk finally vanished. She glanced at Margaret, as if expecting her to do something, but Margaret looked just as pale and stunned. Ryan stepped beside me, his hand firm on my back, offering silent support. Two officers approached the porch, their expressions unreadable. Harper Carter, one of them asked. I nodded.
Yes.
I'm the one who filed the report. I handed them the audio recordings, the bank statements, and the medical report documenting the bruises on my arms. The officers listened, their faces darkening as they played back Nicole's own words incriminating herself. One of the officers turned to Nicole. Miss Palmer, we need you to come with us. Nicole flinched. Wait, what? This is ridiculous. She turned to Margaret. Mom, do something. Margaret just stood there, her face twisted in panic. Officer, this is all a misunderstanding. Ma'am, the officer interrupted, his tone firm. We have enough evidence for fraud and assault charges. Your daughter is coming with us. Nicole tried to push past them, but another officer grabbed her arms. You can't do this, she screamed. Ryan, you're really letting them arrest me? For hers? Ryan's expression didn't waver. You did this to yourself. Nicole's face twisted with rage. She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought she might lunge at me again. But instead, she spat out, You ruined my life. I didn't flinch. No, Nicole. You ruined your own life. The officers hauled her toward the squad car as she kicked and screamed the whole way. Margaret turned to Ryan, her voice breaking. Ryan, please, she's your sister. She made mistakes, but she's family. Ryan stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. You stopped being my mother the moment you let her put her hands on my wife. Margaret reached for him, desperate. Please, son, don't leave me like this. I have nothing left. I thought for a moment Ryan might soften. But then he took a step back and shook his head. This was your choice, Mom. His voice was quiet but firm. And I'm making mine. Margaret broke down right there on the porch as the squad car pulled away, taking Nicole with it. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt something. But all I felt was relief. A few weeks later, Nicole was formally charged with fraud and theft. It turned out I wasn't the only one she had been stealing from. Several elderly victims came forward once the news broke. The state had more than enough evidence to convict her. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Margaret, on the other hand, lost everything. With Nicole gone, she had no money, no support, and no way to afford the house. She called once, a desperate, shaky voicemail. Harper, sweetheart, I made a mistake. I was weak, and I let Nicole take control. I know I hurt you, but please, please help me. I have no one else. I sat there, listening to the message in silence. Then I deleted it. She had made her choice. I was never going back. In the months that followed, Ryan and I focused on rebuilding our lives. We moved into a new home in Tampa, far away from the ghosts of our past. And then one morning, I took a pregnancy test. When I saw the 2 pink lines, I felt a wave of emotions hit me all at once.
Excitement, fear, hope.
I sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the test, when Ryan walked in.
Harper.
He frowned. What's wrong? I looked up at him, tears in my eyes, and whispered, I'm pregnant. His eyes widened, and for a second, he didn't move. Then, without warning, he laughed, a deep, joyful, disbelieving laugh, and pulled me into his arms. We're having a baby, he murmured against my hair. I closed my eyes. We're having a baby. It felt like the final piece of my life falling into place. I had fought. I had suffered. I had lost. But in the end, I won. And as I stood there, in the safety of Ryan's arms, I knew our son, Liam, would never have to know the kind of betrayal I had endured. because we would protect him, because we would be the kind of family I had always dreamed of. The past was behind me, the future was mine, and I was finally free. I heard my husband and best friend planning to kill me on my wedding night. Instead of becoming their victim, I faked my death and vanished. Now I'm back with a new identity, ready for revenge. He thought he won, but I'll take everything from him. I always believed in love. The kind of love that sweeps you off your feet, the one that makes you feel invincible, like the world finally makes sense. And for a while, I thought I had found it with Ethan Grant. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was, how foolish, how deeply I wanted to believe in a fairy tale that never truly existed. My name is Lena Harrington. I built my own fashion empire from the ground up, starting as a young designer with nothing but ambition and talent. I worked tirelessly, sacrificing sleep and social life, turning sketches into collections that caught the eye of the elite in New York City. It wasn't easy, but I made it. My brand, LH Designs, became one of the top names in high-end fashion. I had everything: wealth, success, recognition. But there was one thing I wanted more than anything: a family. Someone to share my victories, my struggles, and my future. Then Ethan Grant walked into my life. He was charming, sophisticated, and every bit the perfect man I had dreamed of. He was the heir to Grant Enterprises, one of the largest investment firms in the country. The media adored him, women desired him, and businessmen respected him. And yet, he made me feel like I was the only one in the world. Our romance was something out of a movie. Lavish dates, weekend getaways, whispered promises of forever. He made me believe in love again. When he proposed, I said yes without hesitation. The wedding was a grand affair, everything I had ever wanted. The dress, the venue, the guests, the vows, it was perfect. Or, at least, I thought it was. It wasn't until our wedding night that my world came crashing down. The reception had been exhausting, and I just wanted to be alone with my husband. Ethan had excused himself to take a business call, so I decided to surprise him in his study. But as I approached the door, I heard voices. Laughter. A woman's voice. Nicole Parker. My best friend since childhood. The woman I had trusted with my life. Curious at first, I leaned closer. But what I heard next turned my blood to ice. She bought every single lie. Ethan's voice was smug. I almost feel bad. Almost. Nicole laughed. Oh, please. Lena was always too naive for her own good. She thought you loved her? She had no clue you were just using her? My breath caught in my throat. The inheritance will be transferred in a few weeks, Ethan continued. Once that's done, she won't be around much longer. She won't suspect a thing, Nicole added. I'll keep playing the perfect friend. And then she'll be out of the way. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My husband. My best friend. They had been planning this all along. Every loving word. Every gentle touch. Every stolen kiss. It was all a lie. I wanted to scream, to burst into the room and confront them, but I knew I couldn't.
Not yet.
If they were planning to get rid of me, I had to be smart. I had to beat them at their own game. I didn't sleep that night. Lying next to Ethan, pretending to be blissfully unaware, I felt sick. His arms around me felt like shackles. His whispered, "I love you," felt like poison. The next morning, I called James Carter. He was the only person I could trust. A private investigator I had hired months ago when I first had doubts about Ethan's shady dealings. I had expected small betrayals, business fraud, maybe an affair, but not this. Not a murder plot. I need to disappear, I told him, my voice shaking. And I need the world to think I'm dead. James was silent for a long moment before he responded. If we do this, there's no going back. You ready for that? I didn't hesitate. I don't have a choice. We spent the next few days planning everything. A car accident. One that would leave no room for doubt. My car would be found at the bottom of a ravine, burned beyond recognition. A staged accident, but convincing enough that no one would question it. I went through the motions, pretending everything was fine. I smiled at Ethan, laughed with Nicole, played the perfect role while knowing it was all a mask. But inside, I was counting down the days until I could break free from them. The night of the accident, I packed a small bag. Only essentials. James drove the car to the cliffside road while I followed in another vehicle. As planned, the car burst into flames as it hit the rocks below. The police reports would confirm my death. There would be a funeral, mourning, crocodile tears from the husband who had never loved me. I stood at a distance, watching the flames rise into the night sky, watching my old life burn away. As the world mourned Lena Harrington, I became someone new. I was no longer the woman they could manipulate, no longer the fool who had trusted the wrong people. I was Elena Monroe now, and I was coming back. Not for love, not for forgiveness, for revenge. The world believed I was dead. My funeral was held in a grand ceremony, a spectacle rather than a tragedy. News outlets covered it, social media flooded with tributes, and the people I had once called friends posted heartfelt messages about how much they would miss me. But I knew the truth. None of them truly cared, especially not Ethan and Nicole. I watched from a distance, hidden under a veil of anonymity, as Ethan stood by my casket with a somber expression. He played the grieving husband perfectly. Dressed in an expensive black suit, he held a handkerchief in his hand as if wiping away non-existent tears. Nicole stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm, offering support as she fought back fake sobs. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to run up to them and expose them right there. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. James had set up everything for my new life. A new identity, a new home, and a carefully constructed past. Elena Monroe was a business consultant from California with an extensive background in finance. She had no history, no family, no loose ends. A ghost with a name. Over the next few months, I rebuilt myself from the ground up. My face changed, not through surgery, but through subtle differences. Darker hair, a different wardrobe, a shift in the way I carried myself. Confidence replaced my once soft and trusting nature. I trained my voice to be firmer, colder. I became unrecognizable to those who once knew me. While I disappeared, Ethan and Nicole thrived. Ethan took full control of my wealth, using forged documents to access the assets I had left behind. My company, LH Designs, was quickly swallowed into his growing empire. Nicole took my place at his side, living the life they had stolen from me. She wore my jewelry, slept in my bed, and spent the money I had earned. They traveled the world, basking in their victory, believing that I was nothing more than ashes in the wind. But they had no idea. I had returned to New York, slipping back into their world without them noticing. I was careful, methodical. I started by learning everything Ethan had been up to. His businesses, his secrets, the people he trusted. With James' help, I gathered evidence of his fraudulent dealings, his embezzlement, and his illegal investments. He was reckless, blinded by greed and power, and it would be his downfall. The first time I saw Ethan again, I almost lost control. He was in a high-end restaurant, laughing over a glass of wine with investors, completely unaware that his past had just walked into the room. I forced myself to remain composed.
He didn't recognize me. Not yet.
I introduced myself as Elena Monroe, a financial expert looking to expand her portfolio. I made sure my name reached him through the right channels, through the people he trusted most. I played the part of a wealthy, ambitious woman eager to invest in grand enterprises. It didn't take long before he took the bait. Our first meeting was surreal. Sitting across from Ethan in his office, shaking his hand as if we were strangers. He smiled at me, the same charming smile he had once used to deceive me. But this time, I wasn't the naive woman who had fallen for his lies. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Monroe," he said smoothly. I returned his smile, tilting my head just slightly. "The pleasure is all mine, Mr. Grant." He had no idea who I was. As our meetings progressed, I gained his trust. I fed his ego, complimenting his business strategies while subtly steering him toward risky decisions. I watched him walk right into the traps I had set. He introduced me to investors, shared confidential business details, and unknowingly handed me the weapons I needed to destroy him. Nicole, however, was different. Unlike Ethan, she had always been suspicious by nature. She watched me with narrowed eyes, sensing something was off but unable to place it. "Where did you say you were from again?" she asked one evening at a business gala, her voice laced with fake politeness. I met her gaze, without flinching. "California. I spent the last few years working with private investors before deciding to expand my network." She studied me for a moment before forcing a smile. "You remind me of someone I used to know." I simply raised my glass. "Do I?" I could see the doubt flicker across her face, but she dismissed it. She had no reason to suspect I had come back from the dead. With each passing week, I pushed deeper into their world, all while planting the seeds of their downfall. I carefully leaked Ethan's fraudulent dealings to the right sources, exposing his corruption without it ever being traced back to me. The media began questioning his legitimacy. Whispers of financial misconduct spread through Wall Street, and investors started to pull out of his company. I watched with satisfaction as the empire he had built on stolen money and deceit began to crumble. But I wasn't done yet. One night, I arranged for a meeting with Ethan at an exclusive lounge, knowing that Nicole would join him. It was time to push her over the edge. Dressed in a sleek black gown, I walked in confidently, meeting Ethan's gaze across the dimly lit room. His expression was smug, believing he had me wrapped around his finger. Nicole sat beside him, her grip on his arm tight, her eyes filled with jealousy. "You look stunning tonight, Elena," Ethan said, his voice smooth as ever. I smiled, tilting my glass toward him. "And you look like a man who has everything he wants." Nicole stiffened beside him. I didn't even need to say anything else. I could see the doubt eating away at her. She had spent years believing she had won, believing that she was the woman by Ethan's side. But here I was, a new player in his life, one he was growing increasingly interested in. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough for only Ethan to hear. "Are you sure you can trust the people closest to you?" He frowned, his confidence faltering for the first time. I leaned back, letting the words sink in. Nicole's eyes darted between us, and I knew she was unraveling. Doubt was a powerful weapon. That night, I left with the certainty that the cracks in their relationship had started to form. Nicole would begin questioning everything. And when the time was right, I would use that doubt to tear them apart completely. Revenge was a game of patience, and I was just getting started. The cracks had begun to show. I could see it in the way Nicole clung to Ethan, the way her once confident presence had turned restless and uneasy. She was questioning everything now, wondering if her place beside him was as secure as she had believed. And I made sure to feed that paranoia. Every interaction I had with Ethan was carefully crafted. A glance here, a subtle smile there. The way I let my fingers brush against his arm just enough to make Nicole notice. The power of suggestion was a dangerous thing. She had betrayed me, taken what was mine, and now it was her turn to feel the weight of betrayal pressing down on her. Ethan, of course, was completely oblivious. He thought he had me exactly where he wanted me, an eager business partner, a potential conquest. He was arrogant enough to believe I would fall for the same charm that had fooled me once before. But I wasn't that woman anymore. One evening, I arranged a meeting with Ethan at his private penthouse. He thought it was about business. I made sure it felt like more than that. Dressed in a sleek navy dress, I arrived late, just enough to make him wait. When I walked in, he was already pouring drinks. "Elena," he greeted, his eyes dragging over me with interest. "I was starting to think you weren't coming." I smiled, taking the glass from his hand. "I like to keep people on their toes." He chuckled, settling onto the couch beside me. "I admire that about you. You have this energy. It reminds me of someone I used to know." I raised an eyebrow.
Who?
He exhaled, swirling his drink. "My late wife." His voice was smooth, almost sad, but I knew him too well. This was just another performance. I took a sip of my drink, watching him carefully. "You must have loved her very much." He looked at me then, holding my gaze. "She was important to me." I wanted to laugh. Important.
That was all I had been to him. Not his love. Not his partner. Just a pawn in his game. I set my glass down and leaned slightly closer, just enough for him to feel it. And yet, she's gone. Ethan's jaw tensed. Life is unpredictable, he murmured, shifting slightly. You never know who you can really trust. I smiled. Isn't that the truth? I let the moment hang between us before pulling away, standing up. I should go, I said, keeping my voice light. I just wanted to discuss the next phase of our investment plan. He watched me carefully, trying to read between the lines, trying to figure me out. But he wouldn't. Not until it was too late. As I walked toward the door, I paused, turning slightly. You should be careful, Ethan, I said softly. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones holding the knife. Then I left, knowing those words would sit in his mind like a seed, growing with every glance Nicole threw his way. The next few weeks were a game of careful destruction. Ethan's empire was already starting to crumble beneath him. Investors were pulling out, the media was questioning his business ethics, and whispers of fraud were turning into very real threats of investigation. He was too busy trying to keep his company together to notice the way Nicole was unraveling. She had started drinking more, lashing out at him in public. Their perfect relationship was crumbling, just like I had planned. I made sure she saw the way Ethan looked at me, the way his attention shifted when I entered a room. I knew her insecurities better than anyone. Then came the breaking point. James had uncovered something important. Nicole had been siphoning money from Ethan's accounts, funneling funds into a private offshore account. It was her exit plan, a safety net in case things went wrong. I couldn't have asked for a better opportunity. I sent the documents to Ethan anonymously. 2 days later, I received a message from him. A single line. Meet me. Tonight. My penthouse. I knew what this was. The final act. When I arrived, the atmosphere was different. The air was tense, charged. Nicole was already there, pacing, her hands trembling. Ethan stood near the window, his face unreadable. You, Nicole spat the moment I walked in, her eyes wild. You did this. I tilted my head slightly. Did what? Ethan turned, his gaze sharp. Don't play games with me, Elena. I met his stare, unflinching. I don't know what you're talking about. Nicole stormed toward me, eyes burning with fury. You've been playing us from the start, she hissed. I knew something was off about you. Ethan cut in, his voice cold. Who are you? Silence filled the room. I smiled, slow and deliberate. The moment had finally arrived. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. You already know the answer, Ethan. His face paled slightly, his eyes searching mine. And then I saw it. Recognition. The pieces clicked together in his mind. His breath hitched. Lena, he whispered. Nicole stumbled back, shaking her head in disbelief. No.
No, this isn't possible.
She's dead.
Her voice cracked, and I tilted my head. You what, Nicole? I asked, my voice ablade. Plotted to kill me? Ethan's hands clenched into fists. This isn't house. I stepped closer, watching them both crumble under the weight of their own betrayal. Did you really think you could bury me and move on? That I wouldn't come back? Nicole turned to Ethan, panic in her eyes. You said she was dead. You swore. Ethan was still staring at me, his face drained of all color. For the first time, he looked afraid. I let the moment stretch, let them feel the fear of what was coming. I spent months watching you take everything from me, I continued. My money, my business, my life. But what you didn't realize is that I was taking something from you too. Piece by piece. I turned to Ethan. Your empire is crumbling. Investigators are closing in. Your investors have lost faith. Soon there will be nothing left. Then I turned to Nicole, letting the final blow land. And you? Ethan knows everything. He knows about the money you've been stealing, the account you set up in secret. The betrayal. Nicole's face twisted in horror. Ethan? But he had already moved, grabbing the documents I had sent him earlier. He threw them onto the table. You lied to me, he hissed. Nicole turned, her face desperate. She's the liar. Ethan's voice was deadly quiet.
Get out.
Nicole froze, realization sinking in. I watched as everything shattered around them. And then, with one last glance at Ethan, I turned to leave. I had done what I came to do. But I wasn't finished yet. Not until I had destroyed him completely. Ethan Grant had lost everything. His company was collapsing, his investors had abandoned him, and his carefully curated reputation was in ruins. And yet, the best part of it all was watching him stand alone. Nicole was gone, her betrayal exposed, her desperate attempts to manipulate him falling apart as quickly as his fortune. I had watched the fight between them unfold, the shouting, the accusations, the desperation in Nicole's eyes when she realized Ethan would never forgive her. I didn't have to do anything else. They destroyed each other. But my revenge wasn't complete just yet. The final step came with the financial investigation I had orchestrated behind the scenes. The moment I had uncovered evidence of Ethan's fraudulent dealings, I made sure the authorities had all the information they needed. Every hidden account, every illegal transaction, every falsified report. The SEC was already circling, but with my help, they swooped in faster than he could react. The day the federal agents stormed his office, I made sure I was there to witness it. I watched from across the street as they led Ethan out in handcuffs, his face pale, his confidence shattered. The cameras caught everything. The once powerful billionaire dragged through the crowd like a common criminal. His business empire was officially dead. That night, I went to the penthouse one last time. He had been released on bail, but he knew what was coming. The case against him was airtight. He was done. He was waiting for me when I arrived, sitting in the dark, an empty glass of whiskey in his hand. The penthouse was no longer the pristine, elegant space it had once been. Papers were scattered everywhere, furniture overturned. A reflection of the man himself, broken, ruined. "You did this," he murmured, his voice hollow. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "You did this to yourself." His eyes met mine, no longer filled with arrogance but something else.
Defeat.
Regret.
Fear.
"You are dead," he whispered. I tilted my head. "Did you grieve me, Ethan? Did you lie awake at night thinking about how much you loved me?" His jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. We both knew the truth. He never loved me. I had been a means to an end, and in the end he had lost. "I don't understand," he finally said. "Why go through all of this? Why not just kill me?" I laughed softly. "Because death would have been too easy for you." I walked toward him, standing over him as he looked up at me, his entire world crumbling around him. "You see, Ethan, I didn't just want revenge," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I wanted you to suffer. I wanted you to know what it feels like to lose everything. To have your life ripped away piece by piece. To be betrayed by the people you trusted the most." I knelt down just enough so we were eye level. "And now, you have nothing left. No power. No company. No allies." His breathing was uneven. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Lena," I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You should have loved me, Ethan." He let out a shuddering breath. I did. The lie was pathetic. I straightened and turned toward the door, leaving him sitting there in the wreckage of the life he had destroyed with his own greed. The next morning, headlines confirmed what I already knew. Ethan Grant was finished. His assets were frozen, his company had officially shut down, and he was facing years in prison. I had done it. I had taken back everything he stole from me and more. And as I walked through the streets of New York, the sun warm against my skin, I felt something I hadn't in a long, long time. Freedom. My name was Lena Harrington, and I had finally won. When I was on a business trip, my greedy husband sold my dream car and spent all the money on gambling, losing everything. Upon returning, I asked him about the car, but his rude response forced me to report it to the police. However, I never expected his reaction when the police arrived. I always believed that love could survive anything. Hard times, misunderstandings, even the worst of arguments. I thought that trust, once built, could never be broken. But I was wrong. Some betrayals cut so deep that no amount of love can heal them. My name is Sophia Carter, and this is my story. For the past year, I thought I had the perfect life. I was 29, a successful businesswoman in New York City, married to the man I loved, Daniel Carter. We had been together for 3 years before we got married, and during those years, he was everything I ever wanted. Kind, charming, supportive. He made me feel like I was the most important person in his life. At first, our marriage was wonderful. I worked hard, climbing the ladder in my company, and Daniel had a stable job as a sales executive. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. I even bought my dream car, a luxury sports car that I had worked years to afford. It wasn't just a car, it was a symbol of my success, my independence, my journey from struggling to thriving. But 1 month ago, everything started to change. Daniel came home one evening looking frustrated, tossing his briefcase onto the couch. When I asked what was wrong, he told me he had quit his job.
Just like that.
No warning, no discussion. He claimed his boss had it out for him, that his colleagues were jealous of his success. At first, I believed him. I comforted him, telling him we'd figure things out together. But something felt off. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel made no effort to find another job. Instead, he stayed out late, disappearing for hours without telling me where he was. When I asked, he snapped at me, saying I was acting like his mother. It wasn't like him to be so short-tempered. He used to tell me everything, but now he avoided my questions, changing the subject every time I asked about money. The late nights turned into entire weekends. He would leave on a Friday evening and return Sunday morning, reeking of alcohol, his clothes wrinkled like he had slept in them. The first few times, I told myself he was just blowing off steam. But then, he started asking me for money. "Just a little, Sophia. I'll pay you back," he'd say with a sheepish smile. At first, I gave in, assuming he needed help while he looked for a new job. But soon, a little turned into larger amounts. When I refused, he'd get defensive. "I'm your husband. Why are you acting like I'm some stranger?" Then came the lies. I caught him sneaking into my wallet, making excuses for missing money. My best friend, Emma, noticed it too. One evening, as we sipped coffee at our favorite cafe, she gave me a concerned look. "Sophia, you need to wake up. Daniel isn't acting like a man who just lost his job. He's hiding something." I didn't want to hear it. I still wanted to believe that he was just going through a tough time. But deep down, I knew Emma was right. Then came the moment that shattered everything. I had to travel for a business trip, 1 week in London for an important conference. Before I left, I made sure everything at home was in order. I even parked my sports car in the garage, knowing how much it meant to me. But when I returned, something was wrong. I walked into the apartment, exhausted from the flight, expecting to see Daniel. Instead, the place was empty. No note, no call, nothing. And then I looked outside. My car was gone. Panic surged through me. I checked my phone, thinking maybe I had missed a message from Daniel, but there was nothing. I grabbed my keys and rushed downstairs to the building security. "Did you see my car?" I asked breathlessly. The guard hesitated. Yeah, Mrs. Carter. Your husband took it a few days ago." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. "Are you sure?" "Yes. He said you knew about it." I didn't know whether to scream or cry. I tried calling Daniel, no answer. Text after text, nothing. Hours passed before he finally walked through the door, looking completely unconcerned. "Where's my car, Daniel?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He gave me a lazy shrug. "Relax, Sophie. It's just a car. Probably got stolen while I was out." I stared at him, disbelief turning into rage. "What do you mean, stolen? Where were you?" He sighed, rubbing his face like I was the one being unreasonable. "Look, I went out with some friends. Maybe I forgot to lock it. I don't know." Lies. More lies. I could see it in his eyes, the way he avoided looking at me. Something was terribly wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Had he really lost it? Or had he done something worse? The next morning, I reported the car missing. I had no choice. I called the police, gave them all the details, and within hours, Detective Ryan Mitchell was assigned to the case. He was a no-nonsense kind of man, the type who had seen it all. "Mrs. Carter," he said, flipping through his notepad, "are you sure your husband wasn't involved?" The question hit me like a slap. I wanted to defend Daniel, to insist he wasn't capable of something like that. But a voice in my head whispered, "Are you sure?" I don't know," I admitted quietly. As the days passed, the investigation revealed disturbing things. My car had been spotted miles away, used in illegal dealings. Someone had sold it. Someone close to me. And I already knew the answer before the detective even said it. Daniel. My husband. The man I trusted. The realization was like a knife through my heart. And yet, I still had no idea how much worse things were about to get. I sat in the living room, staring at my phone, waiting for the detective to call me back. My mind refused to process the truth. Daniel had stolen and sold my car. The thought made my stomach twist. How could he? After everything we had been through, after all the love and trust one had given him, how could he betray me like this? I had spent the last few days convincing myself that maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe he had made a bad decision. Maybe he was struggling more than I knew. Maybe he wasn't the man I thought he was. The phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. Detective Mitchell's voice was firm. "Mrs. Carter, we traced the sale of your car. Your husband sold it to a known criminal in another city. He used a fake name, but we have surveillance footage. There's no doubt it was Daniel." I closed my eyes, inhaling sharply. It was real. The man I had married had stolen from me, lied to my face, and put my name on a crime report. "Mrs. Carter," the detective said after a moment of silence. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "What happens next?" "We're issuing an arrest warrant. He committed fraud. If you have any contact with him, let us know immediately." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you, detective." The moment I hung up, I felt numb. I turned to see Emma standing near the kitchen, watching me carefully. She had been staying with me since the car went missing, knowing something wasn't right. "What did they say?" she asked softly. I hesitated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel sold my car. The police are arresting him." Emma's eyes darkened. "Sophia, you need to get out of this marriage." I wanted to argue, to tell her that it wasn't that simple. But deep down, I knew she was right. I just wasn't ready to accept it yet. That night, I waited for Daniel to come home. I needed answers. I needed to hear the truth from his mouth, no matter how painful it was. At around midnight, the door creaked open, and he stumbled in, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled. He reeked of alcohol and cigarettes. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms crossed. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice cold. He looked up, blinking as if he was surprised to see me. "Out with some friends," he slurred. "Why do you care?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "You stole my car, Daniel. You sold it." For a second, there was silence. Then he scoffed, shaking his head. "Oh, come on, Sophia. Don't act like it's a big deal. It's just a car." I needed the money. Just a car. My hands clenched into fists. "You lied to me. You let me think it was stolen." He rolled his eyes, stepping past me into the kitchen. "Yeah, well, what was I supposed to do? Tell you the truth? You'd just freak out like you're doing right now." My heart pounded in my chest. "You didn't just steal my car, Daniel. You sold it to criminals. Do you even understand what you've done?" He grabbed a beer from the fridge, cracking it open with an annoyed sigh. "Oh, please. You're acting like I murdered someone." I couldn't believe the person standing in front of me was the same man I once loved. "The police know, Daniel. They have proof. They're coming for you." The beer can slipped from his hand, crashing onto the floor. His face turned pale. "What?" "You heard me," I said, my voice steady. "They know everything. You're going to jail." For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "Sophia, no. You have to fix this." "Fix this?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You did this to yourself." His desperation turned to anger in a flash. "You're my wife. You're supposed to stand by me, not turn me in." I stepped back, shaking my head. I stood by you when you lost your job. I stood by you when you started acting strange. I stood by you when you lied to my face. But this is unforgivable. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. Okay. Look, I messed up. But I can fix it. I just need more time. No, I said firmly. I'm done. His eyes snapped to mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something dark flicker across his face. Then he dropped to his knees, grabbing my hands. Please, Sophia. Don't leave me. I love you. I need you, he begged, his voice shaking. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You don't need me, Daniel. You need help. And I'm not going to destroy myself trying to save you. The sound of sirens filled the air. A knock came at the door. Detective Mitchell's voice was calm but firm. Mr. Carter, we have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door. Daniel's grip on my hands tightened for a second before he let go. He looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, regret, maybe even hatred. Then he stood up and walked to the door. The moment the officers took him away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: pain, relief, heartbreak. Emma placed a hand on my shoulder. It's over, Sophia. I shook my head.
No.
It's just the beginning. Because now, I had to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ruins Daniel had left behind. And for the first time, I realized I could do it without him. The night after Daniel was arrested, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The apartment felt emptier than ever, but at the same time, I could finally breathe. For the first time in months, I didn't have to worry about where he was or what lie he was going to tell me next. But that didn't mean the pain had disappeared. It was still there, sitting heavy on my chest, reminding me of everything I had lost. Not just my car, not just my marriage, but the illusion of the man I had once believed in. The next morning, Emma insisted on coming over. She brought coffee and breakfast, even though I barely had the appetite to eat. We sat at the dining table, the silence between us stretching until she finally spoke. So, what now? I took a deep breath. I don't know. You do know, she said, watching me closely. You just don't want to say it. I set my coffee down and met her gaze. I need to leave him. Emma nodded but didn't say, I told you so, even though she had been warning me for months. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're doing the right thing. It should have felt like relief to say it out loud, to finally admit that this marriage was beyond saving. But all I felt was exhaustion. I had spent so much time trying to convince myself that Daniel would change, that if I just loved him enough, he would snap out of whatever dark path he was on. But love wasn't enough. Love couldn't fix a man who didn't want to be fixed. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls. First, to a lawyer. Emma had recommended someone from her firm who specialized in divorce cases. Then, to my parents. I had been avoiding telling them the truth for weeks, ashamed of how far things had spiraled. My mother answered on the first ring. Sophia.
We've been so worried about you.
I swallowed hard. Mom. Daniel was arrested last night. The line went silent. Then, she spoke again, her voice careful. What happened? I told her everything. The job loss, the gambling, the stolen car, the lies. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking. My mother sighed, and when she spoke again, I could hear the pain in her voice.
Oh, sweetheart.
You didn't deserve this. I closed my eyes, trying to fight back the tears. I'm filing for divorce. This time, she didn't hesitate.
Good.
It's time to put yourself first. My father got on the line then, his voice gruff but full of concern. You need anything, you call us. Don't try to handle this alone. I promised them I would be okay, even though I wasn't sure I believed it yet. 2 days later, I went to the courthouse to officially file the papers. As I handed them to the clerk, a strange sense of finality settled over me. This was it. The end of my marriage. The end of everything I had once dreamed of with Daniel. But it was also the beginning of something else, something that felt a lot like freedom. Later that evening, I sat in my apartment, sipping a glass of wine, when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello, Sophia. My stomach twisted at the sound of his voice. Daniel. There was silence on the other end. Then he spoke again, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I messed up. I know I did. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I need you to help me, he continued. Please, Sophia. I have no one else. A part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. To believe, for just a second, that he truly regretted everything. But I had spent too long making excuses for him. You made your choices, Daniel, I said quietly. And now you have to live with them. His voice turned desperate. So that's it? You're just going to walk away? I closed my eyes. Yes. He exhaled sharply, and for a moment, I thought he might beg again. But then his tone changed. You think you're better than me now, don't you? I gripped the phone tighter. I think I deserve better than this. A bitter laugh came through the line. You'll regret this, Sophia. I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, waiting to feel afraid. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would never let anyone make me feel small again. The divorce process moved faster than I expected. Maybe because Daniel didn't fight it. He knew he had no ground to stand on. Or maybe because I had finally stopped looking for reasons to hold on. Either way, within a few months, I was legally free. But freedom, I learned, doesn't come all at once. It creeps in little by little until one day you wake up and realize the weight you've been carrying is gone. For weeks after our final court date, I kept expecting to feel grief, to miss the good parts of what we had. But the truth was, the man I had loved hadn't existed in a long time. Maybe he never had. One evening, Emma came over with a bottle of champagne, insisting we celebrate. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers, taking a sip. The bubbles fizzed against my tongue, light and sharp. To never settling for less again. She grinned. Now that's the energy I like to hear. I had spent so long defining myself by my relationship, by the idea of being someone's wife, someone's partner. But for the first time in years, I was just Sophia. And I was starting to realize that was enough. I threw myself into work, taking on new projects, traveling more. I even booked a solo trip to Europe, something I had always dreamed of, but never allowed myself to do. And while I was in Italy, standing on a quiet balcony overlooking the sea, I felt it, peace. Not just the absence of pain, but the presence of something else. Hope. But the past has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. One afternoon, months after my divorce was finalized, I got a call from Detective Mitchell. I thought you'd want to know. Daniel was released on bail. I sat up straighter. What does that mean for me? Legally? Nothing. But you should be aware that he's out. I thanked him and hung up, my heart pounding. I told myself I had nothing to worry about. Daniel had no reason to come back into my life. I was wrong. That night, as I was walking back to my apartment from dinner with Emma, I spotted someone leaning against the building entrance. Even in the dim light, I knew who it was. Daniel. For a brief second, I considered turning around, walking the other way. But I was done running. I stopped a few feet away, my voice steady. What do you want? He looked different, thinner, older, like the months in jail had drained the life out of him. I just wanted to talk, he said. I thought maybe. There's nothing left to say. He let out a slow breath. I've lost everything, Sophia. I crossed my arms. That's not my problem. A flicker of anger crossed his face, but he swallowed it down. You really don't care, do you? I met his eyes, unflinching. Not anymore. For a moment, he just stared at me, as if searching for something, weakness, regret, anything he could use. But there was nothing left to give him. He shook his head, shoving his hands into his pockets. Guess you got what you wanted. I tilted my head. And what's that? He gave a bitter smile. Your freedom. I nodded. Yes, I did. And I'm never giving it up again. He scoffed but didn't argue. Maybe he finally understood that there was nothing left between us. No second chances, no lingering love. Just the cold, hard truth I had moved on. He turned to leave, pausing only once. "Take care, Sophia." I watched him walk away, disappearing into the city streets, and I knew it was the last time I would ever see him. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring out the window, the city lights stretching endlessly before me. I thought about everything I had been through, everything I had survived. And then I smiled, because for the first time in a long, long time, my life was mine again. My jealous stepsister stole my wealthy husband and kicked me out of the house. After 5 years, she met me at a restaurant and said, "You're still single and working as a waitress?" I laughed. She threw cold water on me, so I called security. She was stunned and dropped to her knees, begging for forgiveness. Then my husband stepped forward. Sophia sat in a quiet corner of her restaurant, her fingers gently tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The dim golden light reflected on the glass walls, giving the place a warm, elegant glow. She took a deep breath and let out a small, almost nostalgic smile before she began speaking. "You know, life has a way of teaching us lessons in the most brutal ways. If you had told me years ago that I would be sitting here telling my story, I would have laughed. Back then, I believed in love, in trust, in the promises people made. I was naive, but life showed me the truth." She paused for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts, then continued, her voice steady, but filled with memories. "I was married once, to a man I loved with all my heart. His name was Daniel. He was charming, successful, and had a way of making me feel like the most important person in the world. When we got married, I thought I had everything: a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a future filled with happiness. I worked hard, too. I wasn't the kind of woman to sit back and rely on my husband's wealth. I had experience in hotel management, and I loved my work. I dedicated myself to helping Daniel with his businesses, making sure everything was running smoothly. But I never realized that while I was busy building our life, someone else was busy destroying it." Sophia's expression darkened slightly as she leaned back, exhaling deeply. "My stepsister, Emma. We weren't close growing up, but I never thought she would betray me like she did. She always had this jealousy in her eyes. No matter what I did, she always wanted more. And Daniel? He fell right into her trap. I should have noticed the small things, the way she looked at him, the secretive smiles they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. But I trusted them. I trusted my husband. I trusted my own family." She let out a bitter chuckle, shaking her head. Then one day, everything changed. Daniel started acting differently. He became distant, cold. The man who once held my hand and promised me forever now barely looked at me. I asked him what was wrong, but he always had some excuse. "Work stress," he said. "Business pressure." But I knew something was off. And then, one evening, he just said it: "I want a divorce." Just like that. No explanation, no remorse. Just a simple statement that shattered my world. Sophia's fingers tightened around her cup as her voice dropped lower. I begged him to tell me why. I asked him if I had done something wrong, if I had failed him in some way. And then she walked in. Emma. Smiling. Standing beside my husband like she had every right to be there. And when I looked at Daniel, I saw the truth in his eyes. He had already replaced me. My own sister had stolen my husband. She inhaled sharply, pushing back the emotions threatening to surface. I screamed, I cried, but they didn't care. They laughed. They actually laughed at me, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience in their perfect little world. Emma smirked, resting her hand on Daniel's shoulder, as if to prove that she had won. And Daniel? He just told me to pack my things and leave. My own home. The place I had built with him. He threw me out like I was nothing. Her voice wavered for a second, but she quickly steadied herself. That night, I walked out with nothing but the clothes on my back. I had no home, no money, no one to turn to. I was completely alone. I remember standing on the street, feeling the cold wind against my skin, wondering how my life had fallen apart so quickly. I could have given up. I could have let them break me, but I didn't. Something inside me refused to let them win. A faint smile played on her lips, but her eyes held a storm of memories. I had experience in hotel management, and I knew I had to start over. I went from one hotel to another, looking for a job. It wasn't easy. Some places turned me away, others offered positions far below what I was qualified for. But I took what I could get. I worked as a receptionist, then a hotel supervisor. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I refused to be a victim. She took another deep breath, her expression hardening. And then, one day, my hard work paid off. That's when I met Ryan, a powerful businessman, owner of one of the most luxurious hotel chains in New York. He wasn't just another wealthy man, he was smart, kind, and respected my talent. He saw potential in me when no one else did. I started working for him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt valued. I wasn't just someone's abandoned wife. I was Sophia, the woman who refused to break. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes gleaming with quiet strength. But life wasn't done with me yet. Fate had something planned, something that would bring me face to face with my past in the most unexpected way. And when that moment came, I knew I would finally get the justice I deserved. Starting over wasn't easy. The first few months were the hardest. I had no money, no home, and no one to rely on. The pain of betrayal burned inside me every single day, but I refused to let it consume me. I told myself that I had two choices. I could sit in my misery and let Daniel and Emma win, or I could stand up and rebuild my life. I chose the second option. I found a small, cheap apartment. Nothing compared to the luxury I once had, but it was mine. I worked long hours at a small hotel as a receptionist. It was humiliating at first, considering I had once managed a five-star establishment, but I swallowed my pride. I needed money, and I needed stability. Every single day, I pushed myself, taking extra shifts, learning more about the business, and proving that I was more than just a woman who had been thrown away. Then one evening, everything changed. The hotel where I was working was hosting a high-profile business event, and the staff was struggling to keep up. I couldn't stand by and watch everything fall apart, so I stepped in. I took charge, coordinated the service, and made sure the guests were taken care of. That's when I met Ryan. He was standing near the entrance, observing everything with an interested expression. I didn't know who he was at first, but I could tell he was important. Later that night, he approached me. "You handled that situation well," he said. His voice was calm but authoritative, the kind that made people listen. I thanked him, thinking it was just a passing compliment, but then he asked me something unexpected. "Have you ever considered working in a high-end hotel again?" I looked at him, surprised. "I used to. But things changed." He nodded, as if he already knew my story. "I own multiple luxury hotels. I need someone who understands the business, someone who knows how to manage difficult situations. I think you're that person." At first, I thought it was too good to be true. People didn't just walk into your life and offer you a chance like that. But Ryan wasn't just anyone. He saw my potential, and for the first time in a long time, someone believed in me again. I took the job. Working for Ryan was completely different from anything I had experienced before. He was sharp, demanding but fair. He challenged me, pushed me to be better, and slowly, I found my confidence again. My career flourished, and before I knew it, I was managing one of his most prestigious hotels. The woman who had been abandoned and humiliated was now in a position of power again. But that wasn't the only thing that changed. Ryan and I spent a lot of time together, discussing business, strategizing, and making decisions that shaped the future of his hotels. Somewhere along the way, those conversations became more personal. He asked about my past, and for the first time, I told someone everything: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggle. He listened, not with pity, but with understanding. And then one night, he told me something that caught me off guard. "Sophia, you're more than what they did to you. You didn't just survive, you rose above it." And I admire that. I didn't know what to say. For so long, I had been carrying the weight of my past, thinking it defined me. But Ryan saw something else, someone who had fought and won. Over time, our relationship shifted. What started as mutual respect turned into something deeper. He wasn't like Daniel, There were no sweet lies, no hidden betrayals. With Ryan, everything was clear and honest. And when he asked me to marry him, I knew my life had finally taken a turn for the better. Becoming Ryan's wife wasn't just about love, it was about reclaiming my power. He didn't just see me as his wife, he saw me as a partner. As a wedding gift, he gave me ownership of 2 luxury restaurants under his hotel chain. It was his way of showing me that he believed in me, that I was capable of running something successful on my own. I had come a long way from the broken woman who had been thrown out onto the streets. Now, I was successful, respected, and loved by a man who truly valued me. But life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. Just when I thought I had left my past behind, fate decided to bring me face to face with the very people who had tried to destroy me. It happened at a grand business event held at one of my restaurants. The place was filled with the wealthiest and most powerful people in the industry. I was walking through the crowd, making sure everything was perfect, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Sophia?" I turned around, and there they were, Daniel and Emma. For a moment, time seemed to stop. It had been years since I had last seen them, but they hadn't changed much. The same arrogance, the same smug expressions. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't the same woman they had abandoned. Daniel's eyes widened in surprise. You work here?" Emma smirked. "I guess life didn't turn out so well for you after all." They thought I was still struggling. They thought I was nothing. I could have told them the truth right then and there, but I didn't. Instead, I just smiled, letting them believe what they wanted. Their mockery didn't affect me anymore because I knew something they didn't. This was my restaurant. I owned it. And soon, they would find out in the most satisfying way possible. I turned to a waiter and casually said, "Bring some water to these guests. They seem a little too confident for their own good." I knew what was coming next. And I was ready. Because this time, I was the one in control. The moment was almost surreal. After all these years, there they were, Daniel and Emma, standing in front of me, laughing at what they thought was my downfall. If only they knew. I let them have their moment. Let them feel superior. I wasn't going to ruin the surprise just yet. Emma crossed her arms, her eyes filled with that same arrogance she always carried. "Honestly, Sophia, I thought you'd be in a better place by now. A manager at a restaurant?" She laughed. "You really downgraded, didn't you?" Daniel shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. "I always told you that you wouldn't survive without me. Look at you now, running around like a waitress in someone else's business." I could have responded right then, but I didn't. Instead, I just smiled, a calmness washing over me as I signaled one of my staff members. Within seconds, a waiter approached, holding a tray with 2 glasses of chilled water. "For our special guests," I said softly. The waiter handed them the glasses, and before they could react, he tipped them forward, spilling the ice-cold water onto their expensive designer outfits. A collective gasp spread through the room as Daniel and Emma stumbled back, their shocked expressions priceless. "What the hell?" Emma shrieked, looking down at her drenched dress. Daniel wiped his face angrily. "Are you out of your mind?" I tilted my head, my smile never fading. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you both needed to cool off." Emma's face turned red with rage. "You," she started, but then her expression shifted as something clicked in her mind. I watched as she looked around, really looked at how the staff reacted to me, at how I carried myself, at how no one reprimanded me for what had just happened. Realization dawned on her face, followed closely by pure shock. "Wait a minute," she whispered. She turned to Daniel, who was still too busy fuming to put the pieces together. "Sophia, she's not just working here." Daniel's brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I let the silence stretch, enjoying the moment. Then I leaned forward slightly. "I don't work here," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I own this place." For a second, neither of them spoke. Their stunned expressions were worth every bit of the pain they had put me through. Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Daniel's smirk had disappeared completely. "That's not possible," Daniel muttered. You were nothing after I left you." "There's no way." I shrugged. "And yet here I am. While you two were busy living in your fantasy, I was out here rebuilding my life, creating something better than anything you could ever imagine. I let my words sink in before delivering the final blow. And just so you know, I didn't just build a business. I married a man who actually values me. A man who sees my worth and treats me as his equal. My husband, Ryan, owns one of the most successful hotel chains in this city. And as his wife, he made sure I got what I deserved, 2 luxury restaurants under my name. The color drained from their faces. Emma's jealousy was almost tangible, her fists clenched at her sides. Daniel looked like he had swallowed something bitter. They had expected to see me struggling, broken. Instead, they had walked right into the world I had built for myself. One far grander than the life they had stolen from me. "I don't believe this," Emma hissed. "You're lying." I laughed, a genuine, satisfied laugh. Why would I need to lie? The proof is all around you. Every person in this room knows who I am. This is my world now, Emma. Not yours. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. "Sophia, we didn't mean to hurt you. It was a mistake. I made a mistake." His tone had changed now, desperate, almost pleading. "We were young. We were foolish. But you're successful now. You're happy. Isn't that enough?" I saw it then, the regret in his eyes. Not regret for what he had done, but regret that I had risen above it. He wasn't sorry for betraying me. He was sorry that his betrayal hadn't destroyed me. Emma, however, was seething. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" she spat. "You think just because you got lucky—" I cut her off, my voice sharper this time. Luck had nothing to do with it. Everything I have, I built with my own hands. I worked for it. Unlike you, Emma, I don't need to manipulate and steal to get what I want. She took a step forward, but before she could say another word, I lifted a hand. "I think we're done here." "Security?" 2 guards immediately stepped forward, their expressions blank but ready. Daniel's eyes widened. "Wait, what are you doing?" I crossed my arms. "Escorting you out. I don't allow filth in my establishment." Emma let out a bitter laugh. "You can't just throw us out." I smiled. "I can. And I am." The guards moved in, taking them both by the arms. Daniel resisted for a moment, but Emma was too stunned to fight back. "Sophia, please." Daniel tried one last time. "We can talk about this. We made mistakes, but we're still family." I stared at him, feeling nothing but satisfaction. "You stopped being my family the day you betrayed me." And with that, I turned my back on them. The doors swung open, and as they were dragged out into the cold night, I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. The past had finally been dealt with, but I wasn't done just yet. I had one last move to make, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. Sophia let out a slow breath, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. There was a moment of silence before she continued, her voice steady, but laced with finality. I could have let it end there. Kicking them out of my restaurant was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. Not after everything they had done to me. They had stolen years of my life, left me to suffer while they built their perfect world on top of my pain. And now it was my turn. After that night, I made a few calls. I had kept track of Daniel and Emma, even when I didn't think I would ever need to cross paths with them again. Old habits, I suppose. And what I found out was interesting. Daniel's businesses weren't doing as well as they used to. The market had changed, and without someone like me to help him manage things, cracks had started forming. His investments weren't as smart as he believed, and his partners? Well, let's just say they were losing confidence in him. As for Emma, she was exactly where I expected her to be, playing the role of a perfect wife, clinging to the man she had stolen, thinking that his money would keep her safe forever. They were still living comfortably, but I saw the signs. The desperation. The slow decline. It was only a matter of time before everything they had built started to crumble. And I decided to give fate a little push. Through Ryan's connections, I made sure word spread in the right circles about Daniel's instability as a businessman. Rumors, doubts, the kind of whispers that made investors nervous. I didn't have to lie, his mistakes were real. I just made sure people noticed them. One by one, his deals started falling apart. His credibility? Shattered. His business? Hanging by a thread. But that wasn't enough. I had something else planned. Something more personal. It happened on a quiet evening. I received a message. Daniel wanted to meet. Desperation had finally driven him to me. I agreed, choosing a private lounge in one of my hotels. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at the far end of the dimly lit room. He looked different, tired, older, the weight of his failures dragging him down. "Sophia," he said as I approached. His voice had lost that arrogant edge. "Thank you for meeting me." I sat across from him, crossing my legs calmly. "What do you want, Daniel?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I need help." He hesitated before adding, "From you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Help? From the woman you abandoned? The woman you humiliated?"
His jaw tightened.
"I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But things are difficult right now. Business isn't what it used to be. Investors are backing out, and I just need someone with your experience." I laughed, shaking my head. "Let me guess. Emma doesn't know how to fix your mess, does she?" His expression darkened, but he didn't deny it. I leaned forward slightly. "You had everything, Daniel. A wife who loved you, a successful business, a stable life. And you threw it all away for my stepsister. Now you want me to fix the mess you made? Tell me, why would I ever help you?" His lips parted, but before he could respond, the doors opened. Emma walked in, looking like she had seen a ghost. Her eyes darted between me and Daniel, suspicion clouding her face.
"What's going on?" she demanded.
I smiled. "Your husband asked me for help. Seems like things aren't going so well in your little paradise." Her face twisted in anger.
"You think you're so smart, don't you?"
"You think you've won." I stood up, adjusting my coat. "Emma, I won the moment you betrayed me. Everything you did to break me only made me stronger. And now you're both drowning in the mess you created." Daniel's hands clenched into fists. "Sophia, please." I cut him off with a raised hand. "No, Daniel. You made your choices. Now you live with them." As I turned to leave, I made one last move, the final stroke of my revenge. I pulled out my phone and pressed a button. Within moments, the doors swung open again. This time, 2 police officers stepped inside. Emma's face went pale. "What is this?" I turned back, my smile cold. "Justice." Daniel shot up from his seat. "What the hell is going on?" I handed the officers a folder. "Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, the list is long. You thought you could cheat your way through business, Daniel, but the law doesn't work that way." Emma stumbled back. This is a mistake. You can't do this." I tilted my head. "Oh, but I can." And I just did. The officers stepped forward, reading Daniel his rights as they handcuffed him. Emma tried to fight, but it was no use. Her perfect world had come crashing down around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As they were led away, Daniel turned back one last time, his face filled with regret. "Sophia, I'm sorry." But his apology meant nothing. I walked out of the lounge, stepping into the cool night air, feeling lighter than I had in years. The past was finally behind me. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It no longer held any power over me. I had rebuilt my life. I had found love again. And most importantly, I had gotten the justice I deserved. They say karma works in mysterious ways, but I prefer to think of it as balance. And tonight, everything was exactly where it was meant to be. My obsessed twin sister stole my husband to get his $250 million company. Within a week, he died in an accident. She laughed at his funeral and said, "My plan was successful." But when the lawyer read my husband's will, everyone was stunned. His written words were, "I never thought my life would turn out this way. If someone had told me years ago that I would be standing where I am now, I wouldn't have believed them." But life has a cruel way of showing us the truth about people, about love, and most importantly, about ourselves. Let me start from the beginning. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, the quiet twin, the one no one really noticed. My sister, Isabella, was the complete opposite. Loud, confident, radiant. She walked into a room, and everyone turned to her, their eyes filled with admiration. My parents, our teachers, even strangers. It was always Isabella they praised. "Look at her," my mother would say, watching Isabella charm her way through another conversation. "She's going to do great things." And me? I was barely a footnote in their world. From the moment we could walk, Isabella had a natural talent for drawing attention. It wasn't just her looks, though she was undeniably beautiful. It was her ambition. She knew what she wanted, and she knew how to get it. I was just the girl standing next to her, the one people forgot about. While she shined in school, excelled in social circles, and later climbed the ranks in the fashion industry, I found solace in something quieter, writing. I always had a way with words, an ability to express emotions on paper that I could never seem to articulate out loud. So, while Isabella became the darling of our family, I moved to Chicago and started working as a journalist. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. I loved telling stories that mattered. And for once, I felt like I had a purpose beyond being Isabella's twin. Then Nathan Collins walked into my life. I met him at an event I was covering. He was everything I thought I wanted: charming, intelligent, successful. A tech entrepreneur, already making millions before turning 35. But what really drew me to him wasn't his success, it was the way he looked at me. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Nathan wasn't like my parents, who dismissed me, or like Isabella, who overshadowed me. He made me feel special. He listened when I spoke, he laughed at my jokes, and he made me believe that I was worth loving. We dated for 2 years, and when he asked me to marry him, I didn't hesitate. I thought I had finally found someone who chose me over Isabella. For a while, it was perfect. We built a life together, one that felt simple and safe. We moved into a beautiful townhouse, spent our evenings cooking together, and made plans for the future. I thought I had escaped my past, the comparisons, the loneliness, the feeling of never being good enough. But perfection never lasts. The first signs of change were subtle. Nathan started coming home late, his affection grew distant, and his once warm eyes became cold. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. He was just busy. Work was stressful. He still loved me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I started noticing the little things. The way he avoided eye contact. The way his phone was always face down on the table. The unfamiliar perfume on his clothes. I tried to ignore it, tried to pretend I was imagining things. Then one evening, my entire world shattered. Nathan sat across from me at the dinner table, barely touching his food. His voice was cold, detached, like he was discussing business, not our marriage. I want a divorce. His words hit me like a gunshot to the chest. I sat there, frozen, my fork slipping from my fingers. I stammered, my heart pounding. "I've made up my mind," he said flatly. "I don't love you anymore, Sophia." I couldn't breathe. This was the man who had promised to love me forever, the man who had made me believe I was finally enough. "Is there someone else?" My voice barely came out. Nathan didn't answer. The silence was enough. I felt my world collapsing, but before I could even process what was happening, the doorbell rang. And that's when I saw her. Isabella. She walked in like she owned the place, her high heels clicking against the floor, her smug smile sending a chill through my body. "Surprise, Sophia." She didn't need to say anything else. The way she looked at Nathan said it all. It wasn't just a divorce. My own sister had stolen my husband. I felt the ground disappear beneath me, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I turned to Nathan, praying, begging, to see regret in his eyes. But he didn't even look at me. I had never felt so betrayed. Isabella crossed her arms, tilting her head, enjoying the moment. "You always lived in my shadow," she said. "It's time you stayed there for good." I wanted to scream, to cry, to fight back, but I couldn't. I was too shattered, too broken, too betrayed. People say that betrayal is like a knife to the heart. They're wrong. It's worse than that. A knife wound heals. Betrayal? It lingers. It infects every memory, every moment, every piece of who you are. I don't remember how long I sat there that night, staring at Nathan and Isabella, my mind refusing to accept the reality before me. My husband, my sister, together. Nathan barely looked at me as he stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored designer suit, like this was just another business meeting he was walking out of. Isabella, on the other hand, was enjoying every second of it. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, tilting her head with that same self-satisfied smirk I had grown up seeing. "I assume you won't make this difficult, Sophia," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. Difficult? I could barely breathe, let alone fight back. I felt humiliated. My own sister had stolen my husband, and neither of them had the decency to hide it. Nathan cleared his throat, finally looking at me. But there was no guilt, no regret, just a cold indifference. "I'll make sure you're financially taken care of," he said, as if that was supposed to make it better. Money. That's all I was to him now, a transaction, a problem to be settled and forgotten. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but I couldn't find my voice. Instead, I just nodded, too numb to process anything. The divorce was finalized in less than 2 months. Nathan paid me $250,000, a small fraction of his $50 million empire. That's what my marriage had been worth to him. Nathan's company, Collins Tech Solutions, was valued at $42 million. His luxury penthouse in downtown Chicago, $8 million. And me? I walked away with just enough to disappear. The press barely noticed. A small mention in a business magazine, a quiet headline in an online gossip site. Nathan Collins divorces wife, engaged to fashion executive Isabella Bennett. The perfect power couple. I stopped checking social media after that. I couldn't bear to see the pictures. Isabella draped over Nathan at fancy galas, flashing diamond rings, sipping champagne in places we had once talked about visiting together. My former life, now hers. I didn't speak to my parents either. I didn't have to. I knew where their loyalty would be. "She's successful, Sophia," my mother had once said, the night before my wedding. "You should learn to be more like her." I had always been the disappointment. The quiet one. The shadow. And now I was nothing. I spent the next few months barely existing. I went through the motions. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. My once thriving journalism career felt pointless. I couldn't focus. I couldn't write. Everywhere I turned, there was Isabella's face on a magazine cover. Nathan's name in the news. It wasn't until I ran into an old friend that things started to change. "Jesus, Sophia," Maggie, my former college roommate, said when she saw me at a cafe. "You look like a ghost." I shrugged, forcing a half-hearted smile. "I feel like one." Maggie was the kind of person who didn't take excuses. She sat me down, ordered me a coffee, and forced me to talk. And for the first time, I let it out. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking, my coffee untouched. Maggie leaned forward, eyes burning with anger. "And you just let them win?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. Win? That's what Isabella wanted, wasn't it? She didn't just want Nathan. She wanted to see me broken. And I had let her. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't cry myself to sleep. Instead, I felt something else rising inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. I had lost everything. But I wasn't going to stay down. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm rang. A first in months. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before swinging my legs out of bed and standing up. It was time. Time to rebuild. The first step? Taking back control of my life. I walked into my office, where my laptop sat untouched, covered in dust. Opening it, I stared at the blank screen before typing the first few words of my new story. I had always been good at uncovering secrets, at telling stories that mattered. Now, I had one hell of a story to tell. I started small, just observing. I dug into Isabella's business dealings, searched for any weaknesses in Nathan's company. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew where there's power, there's corruption. It was only a matter of time before I found something useful. A few weeks later, while scrolling through an anonymous business forum, I stumbled upon a rumor, a whisper about Collins Tech Solutions being in trouble. Publicly, Nathan's company was thriving. But behind the scenes, there were cracks forming. And I was going to find them. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what they don't tell you is that it takes time. It takes patience, planning, and a level of control I never knew I had. For weeks, I had buried myself in research, combing through Collins Tech Solutions financial records, news reports, and anonymous industry forums. What I found was just the beginning of something much bigger. Nathan's company was not as stable as it seemed. Publicly, Collins Tech Solutions was valued at $42 million, a rapidly growing tech empire. But behind the scenes, it was crumbling. The first clue came from a leaked internal document, buried deep in a tech forum. A whistleblower, anonymous, of course, claimed that the company had been making risky investments, gambling with millions in shady deals. At first, I thought it was just business as usual, rich men playing dangerous games. But then I dug deeper. Nathan had been moving large sums of money to offshore accounts, hiding assets just in case things went south. His empire wasn't just struggling, it was built on lies. And Isabella? She had no idea. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. My sister, the queen of manipulation, had married a man who was just as deceptive as she was. But this wasn't enough. I needed proof. That's when I reached out to James Anderson. James was a private investigator, known for his ability to dig up dirt on the wealthy and powerful. I had read about him in an exposé I had written years ago. Back then, I never thought I'd need someone like him. But now, I needed the best. I met him in a quiet bar on the outskirts of Chicago, far from any place Isabella or Nathan would frequent. He was in his 40s, sharp-eyed, and ex-military, the kind of man who didn't waste time on small talk. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked, his voice steady. I hesitated. I could have just told him that I wanted dirt on Isabella, something to ruin her reputation, to make her feel the same humiliation she had made me feel.
But this was bigger than that.
I wanted justice. "I need to know everything," I said. About Nathan. About Isabella. Their finances, their business dealings. Anything that can bring them down. James studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll see what I can find." A few days later, he delivered. When James handed me the file, my hands trembled. I had expected fraud, maybe tax evasion, or even an illicit affair or two. But what he found, it was so much worse. Isabella had been embezzling money from her own company for over a year. Millions of dollars had been funneled into her personal accounts, disguised as business expenses. Nathan, meanwhile, had been laundering money through shell companies, fake businesses created to hide illegal transactions. They were both criminals in different ways. And now I held the evidence. I didn't want to go public just yet. That would be too easy. Too quick. No, I wanted to watch them fall apart from the inside. I started with Isabella. A simple anonymous tip to the board of directors at her company. Within a week, the company launched an internal investigation. The next step? Nathan. Using a fake email account, I sent the financial documents James had found to one of Nathan's biggest investors, a man known for having zero tolerance for dishonesty. Within days, whispers of fraud began to spread through the business world. Nathan's empire was about to collapse, and he didn't even see it coming. A few weeks later, the first headline hit the news. Fashion executive Isabella Collins under investigation for financial fraud. I sat in my apartment, watching it unfold on TV, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea. The camera zoomed in on Isabella, stepping out of her luxury car, surrounded by reporters. She looked shaken, but she still had that arrogant tilt to her chin, like she thought she could talk her way out of this. But the world wasn't listening. Not this time. I smiled. But the best part? It wasn't over yet. 2 days after Isabella's scandal broke, Nathan's company was hit with a federal investigation. Fraud. Money laundering. Financial corruption on a massive scale. Investors pulled out overnight. Stock prices plummeted. And Nathan? For the first time since our divorce, he called me. I stared at his name flashing on my phone, my heart pounding. I could have ignored it. I should have. But I answered, "Hello, Nathan." A long silence. Then his voice, shaky, unsure. "Sophia, did you?" He stopped. Swallowed. "Did you do this?" I almost laughed. He had no idea who he had underestimated. "You did this to yourself, Nathan," I said, my voice calm. "I just helped the world see the truth." Another pause. Then a sharp inhale. "Sophia, please, you don't understand. I can fix this." "Fix this?" I clenched my jaw. "You mean the way you fixed our marriage?" Silence. I let the moment stretch before speaking again, my voice quiet but firm. "Goodbye, Nathan." And then I hung up. It didn't take long for Isabella to come crawling back. She showed up at my apartment one night, her perfect facade cracked for the first time in years. Her makeup was smudged, her expensive coat wrinkled, and her desperation was unmistakable. "Sophia," she said, breathless, her voice breaking. I need your help." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "My helps?" I echoed, pretending to think. "You mean the way you helped me when you stole my husband?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't deny it. "I made a mistake," she admitted. I raised an eyebrow. "Which one? The fraud? The embezzlement? Or the part where you tried to ruin my life?" A single tear slipped down her cheek. "I have nothing left," she whispered. And for the first time in my life, I saw Isabella for who she truly was. Not the golden child. Not the perfect twin. Just a broken, desperate woman who had finally lost. I could have let her in. I could have forgiven her. But some betrayals are too deep. I smiled, just like she had that night when she took Nathan away from me. "Good," I said simply. And then I closed the door in her face. I never thought revenge would taste this sweet. But standing here now, watching everything Isabella and Nathan built crumble to dust, I finally felt it, the satisfaction of knowing that they would never rise again. The news of Nathan's financial crimes spread like wildfire. His investors abandoned him, his company's stock plummeted, and soon, the federal investigation turned into an official indictment. Nathan Collins, once hailed as one of the most promising tech entrepreneurs, was now a disgraced businessman facing fraud charges that could send him to prison. The man who had so easily discarded me, who had replaced me like I was nothing, was now the one being discarded by the world. I watched his downfall from a distance, never once feeling the need to reach out. I had given him the chance to do right by me, and he had chosen betrayal. Now he had no one left to save him. Isabella, however, was a different kind of beast. She wasn't the type to go down without a fight. Even as the fraud allegations mounted, even as she lost her company and her carefully curated reputation, she still clung to her arrogance. She tried to spin the media narrative, painting herself as a victim of misinformation. But the truth was undeniable, and soon, she was left with nothing. Her high-powered friends disappeared, her lavish lifestyle collapsed, and the woman who had spent her life stepping on others to get ahead now found herself completely alone. She tried calling me again. I didn't answer. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Nathan's lawyer. At first, I considered tossing it in the trash, assuming it was some desperate attempt to make a deal. But curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, I found something I never expected: Nathan's will. I read through the papers, my hands trembling. Nathan had left everything to me. The business, the properties, the remaining assets. All of it. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Why would a man who betrayed me, who destroyed my life, suddenly decide to hand me everything he had left? Then, I saw the letter attached. "Sophia, I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't blame you. I don't deserve it. I made the worst mistake of my life when I walked away from you. I thought I was choosing something better, something more exciting. But Isabella never loved me. She loved my wealth, my power, my name. And I was too blind to see it until it was too late. By the time I realized what I had done, there was no way back. You had already moved on, and I knew I had lost you forever. But I can't leave this world knowing that she wins. She took everything from you once. I won't let her take anything more. I've left everything to you. The business, the money, the house. It should have always been yours. Maybe this is my last attempt to make things right, or maybe it's just my way of ensuring that Isabella gets exactly what she deserves. Nothing. I hope you use this to build a future that's truly yours. A future where no one overshadows you, where no one controls your worth. You were always stronger than you knew, Sophia. I see that now. I'm sorry it took losing you to realize it. Nathan. I read the letter twice, feeling a storm of emotions I wasn't ready for. Anger, sadness, and something that almost felt like pity. He had destroyed me, but in the end, he had destroyed himself too. And now, he was gone, leaving behind nothing but regret. I didn't cry. I didn't grieve for him. He had made his choices, and he had to live with them, until he couldn't anymore. I took the estate, but I had no interest in keeping Nathan's business. I sold the company, liquidated the assets, and took what was left to start fresh. I found a new apartment, one that was mine and mine alone, free from the ghosts of my past. I poured myself into my writing again, not just as a journalist, but as an author. I had a story to tell now, one that I knew would matter. One evening, as I was packing up my old things, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I wasn't surprised to see Isabella standing there, looking disheveled and lost. She was a shadow of the woman she once was, her designer clothes wrinkled, her makeup smudged, her desperation barely hidden. "You took everything from me," she whispered. I tilted my head, studying her. "Did I? Or did you do that to yourself?" She swallowed, her throat tightening. "I have nowhere to go, Sophia. No one to turn to." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the way she had smiled when she took Nathan from me. The way she had told me I belonged in her shadow. The way she had reveled in my pain. I took a deep breath and stepped aside. "That's not my problem." She stared at me, expecting me to cave, expecting me to be the same sister who had always let her win. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had finally learned my worth. I shut the door in her face, locking her out of my life for good. Standing there, in the silence of my new beginning, I realized something. I had spent my whole life being the quiet one, the forgotten twin, the girl in the shadows. Not anymore. This was my story now. And for the first time, I was the one writing the ending. My husband divorced me on our honeymoon. I shouted, "How dare you do this?" My mother-in-law slapped me hard and said, "In my family, there is no space for a cheap girl." They abandoned me and left the place. But I took a bold step, and before they arrived home, a shocking surprise awaited them. My name is Elena, and this is the story of how I was betrayed by the man I loved, humiliated by his family, and left alone to suffer, only to rise stronger than ever. I met Daniel during my college years in Los Angeles, California. He was charming, intelligent, and full of life. From the very beginning, he made me feel like I was the most special person in the world. We spent countless evenings studying together, laughing over coffee, and making plans for the future. Daniel wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my best friend, my safe place, and my greatest love. When he proposed to me after 5 years of being together, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I was ecstatic. But there was just one problem: his mother, Margaret. Margaret was never happy about our relationship. She saw me as someone beneath her family status. "A girl like you has nothing to offer Daniel," she once told me coldly when we first met. It didn't matter that I had a stable career or that I truly loved her son. To her, I was a nobody. But Daniel always reassured me. "Don't worry about her," he would say, holding my hand. "She'll come around eventually. I love you. And that's all that matters." I believed him. I trusted him. Despite Margaret's disapproval, we got married. At first, it felt like a dream. Daniel and I moved into a beautiful apartment, and life seemed perfect. But the illusion didn't last long. Margaret would visit constantly, uninvited. Every time she came over, she would comment on everything I did. "You don't even know how to take care of a house properly," she would say while inspecting my kitchen. Or worse, she would say things like, "A woman's real value is measured by her wealth. Love doesn't pay the bills." I knew she didn't like me, but I never expected what she had planned next. A month after our wedding, Daniel and I planned our honeymoon trip. It was supposed to be our first real escape, just the two of us, away from everything. I was beyond excited. For once, it would be just Daniel and me, no interference, no tension. But the night before we were set to leave, Margaret made an unbelievable announcement. "I'm coming with you," she said casually over dinner, sipping her wine like it was the most natural thing in the world. I nearly choked on my food. "What?" Daniel didn't even look at me. He just sighed and said, "Mom, are you sure? I mean, this is our honeymoon." "Of course, I'm sure," Margaret replied, setting down her glass. "It's been so long since I traveled, and I think we'll have much more fun together as a family." A part of me expected Daniel to say no, to stand up for me, but he didn't. He just nodded and said, "I guess it'll be fine, Elena. Let's not make a big deal out of it." Not make a big deal out of it? I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. This was supposed to be about us, not Margaret. Why was she always in our marriage? But I stayed quiet. I had spent so long trying to keep the peace that I swallowed my anger and convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be that bad. I was so wrong. When we reached our honeymoon destination, something felt off. Daniel was acting nervous, checking his phone constantly. And then, at the airport, a young woman was waiting for us. She was beautiful, confident, and well-dressed. A woman who clearly belonged to the world Margaret admired. "Sophia, you're here." Margaret greeted her warmly, hugging her like an old friend. Sophia smiled, glancing at me briefly before focusing on Daniel. "Finally, we meet in person," she said, her voice dripping with familiarity. I looked at Daniel, confused. Who was she? Why was she acting like she knew my husband? And then Margaret turned to me, her eyes cold and cruel. "Elena, this is Sophia," she said, her lips curling into a smirk. "She's going to be Daniel's new wife." The world stopped. I stared at them, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. "What are you talking about?" I managed to whisper, feeling my hands shake. Margaret let out a small laugh. "Oh, sweetheart, don't act surprised. Did you really think you were going to stay in this family forever?" I turned to Daniel, desperate, begging with my eyes for him to tell me this was a mistake. "Daniel, tell me this is a joke," I pleaded. "Tell me she's lying." He looked away. "I'm sorry, Elena," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "But I don't have a choice." My entire world shattered. I stepped back, feeling like I couldn't breathe. "You don't have a choice?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "What does that even mean?" That's when Margaret delivered the final blow. "It means that if he doesn't divorce you and marry Sophia, he's out of the family business. No money, no power, nothing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own husband, my Daniel, was choosing money over me. I couldn't hold back my tears. "How could you?" I whispered. "How could you do this to me, Daniel?" Before I could say another word, Margaret slapped me. Hard. I gasped, my face burning from the force of it. "Shut your mouth," she hissed. "You are nothing. You were never good enough for us." Daniel still said nothing. He just stood there as his mother humiliated me, as if he had already made his decision. "Sign the divorce papers, Daniel," Margaret instructed. And then, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience, my husband took the papers and signed them. Just like that, our marriage was over. Sophia smiled, taking Daniel's arm like she had won a prize. "Come on, darling," she purred. "We have a wedding to plan." I watched as they got into the car, leaving me standing there, alone, broken, discarded. Margaret rolled down the window one last time, sneering. "There's no place for cheap girls like you in our family." Then they drove away. I stood there, my heart ripped apart, my world completely shattered. But as the tears fell down my face, something inside me changed. They thought they could break me. They thought they could walk away, without consequences. They had no idea who they were messing with. And that was the moment I decided I was going to get revenge. I stood frozen, watching the car disappear into the distance. My own husband, the man I trusted, had betrayed me in the most humiliating way possible. Margaret's cruel words echoed in my mind, and my cheek still burned from her slap. I felt numb, as if my body had given up on feeling anything at all. For a while, I just stood there, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. The man who once held me in his arms and promised to love me forever had left me like I was nothing. Tears streamed down my face as I struggled to breathe. The world around me blurred, my legs weak beneath me. I was alone, truly alone. I didn't know how long I stood there until I finally forced myself to move. I needed to get out of there, away from the place where my life had just been torn apart. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person I knew would stand by me no matter what. Ryan, my younger brother. Elena? His voice was sharp with concern the moment he picked up. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. A choked sob escaped instead. Elena, what happened? Are you okay? I inhaled shakily, my voice barely above a whisper. He left me, Ryan. Daniel left me for someone else. There was a long silence. Then, in a low, controlled voice, Ryan asked, "Where are you?" I gave him the address, and before I could even say anything else, he said, "Stay right there. I'm coming to get you." By the time Ryan arrived, I had collapsed onto a bench outside the airport, staring blankly ahead. The moment I saw him, I felt everything hit me at once. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the sheer humiliation of being abandoned so easily. Ryan crouched in front of me, gripping my shoulders. "Tell me everything." Through my sobs, I told him what happened. How Margaret had orchestrated everything. How she had found a wealthy businesswoman for Daniel to marry. How Daniel had chosen money and power over me. How he had signed the divorce papers right in front of me and left without a second thought. Ryan's jaw clenched as he listened, his hands tightening into fists. That bastard. That absolute bastard. I wiped my face, my voice hollow. What am I supposed to do now? He destroyed me, Ryan. He took everything from me and walked away like I was nothing. Ryan took a deep breath, his expression turning dangerously calm. "You're not going to sit here and cry, that's for sure. You're going to fight back." I frowned. Fight back? How? Ryan's eyes burned with determination. "We're going to find out everything about Margaret, Sophia, and Daniel. There's no way they're as perfect as they pretend to be. You think a woman like Sophia just magically appears, and Margaret suddenly decides she's the perfect daughter-in-law? Something doesn't add up." For the first time since this nightmare began, a spark of hope ignited inside me. He was right. Margaret had orchestrated this whole thing too perfectly. There had to be something, some weakness, some secret that could bring them down. Ryan didn't waste time. He called a private investigator that he had worked with before on cases. Within an hour, we had someone digging into Margaret's business, Sophia's past, and Daniel's finances. While we waited for results, Ryan took me back to his house. I sat in his living room, numb but determined. "Do you still love him?" Ryan asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. Did I? The man I loved had vanished the moment I saw who he truly was. I shook my head. I loved the person I thought he was. But that man doesn't exist anymore. Ryan nodded approvingly. "Good. Because when we take them down, I don't want you hesitating. They wouldn't hesitate to destroy you." A week passed, and the private investigator finally returned with shocking evidence. Margaret wasn't just running a business. She was running an empire built on fraud, illegal dealings, and smuggling. And Sophia? She was involved too. Her entire fortune was tied to dirty money. But the most surprising part? Daniel knew everything. He had been helping them cover up their crimes for years. I felt my breath catch as I read the reports. He was involved this whole time? Ryan nodded grimly. That's why Margaret was so confident. She knew Daniel wouldn't refuse her, because he was already deep in it. If he stepped out of line, she could destroy him too. A slow, cold anger settled inside me. All those years, I thought I was building a future with a good man. Instead, I had been living with a liar. Ryan leaned forward. "Elena, it's time. We take this to the authorities. We bring them down." I stared at the documents, my hands shaking. This was it.
My chance to make them pay for what they did to me.
I took a deep breath and nodded. Let's do it. Ryan immediately made the calls. By the end of the day, the police had everything they needed. A plan was put into motion. A raid was scheduled. Soon, we would have them trapped with no way out. The night before the operation, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I had been weak before, a victim.
But now?
Now I was ready. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice. The morning of the raid arrived, and I stood by Ryan's side, watching as the police finalized their preparations. My heart pounded in my chest, but this time, it wasn't from fear or heartbreak. It was from something stronger, determination. For so long, I had felt powerless, but today, that was going to change. Today, Daniel, Margaret, and Sophia would face the consequences of their greed and betrayal. Ryan handed me a cup of coffee, his expression serious. You okay? I nodded. I will be after today. The police had everything planned perfectly. Their targets, Daniel, Margaret, and Sophia, had no idea that the warehouse where they conducted their illegal dealings was already under surveillance. The authorities had enough evidence to charge them with fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Ryan and I were stationed at a safe distance, watching as undercover officers moved into position. My fingers tightened around my cup as I thought about the people I once considered family. Margaret had stolen my husband from me, Sophia had taken my place, and Daniel had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Now they were about to pay for it all. Moments later, a sleek black car pulled up outside the warehouse. Even from a distance, I recognized the figures stepping out. Margaret, Sophia, and Daniel. Sophia walked ahead confidently, her designer heels clicking against the pavement, while Margaret whispered something to her. Daniel trailed behind them, looking anxious. They have no idea what's coming, Ryan muttered beside me. I watched as they entered the warehouse, the doors shutting behind them. A few minutes later, the police moved in. Sirens blared, and the officers stormed inside, surrounding them before they could even react. Through the surveillance footage on a nearby monitor, I saw Margaret's eyes widen in shock, Sophia frozen in place, and Daniel looking around in a panic. The officers shouted commands, forcing them to the ground. Margaret tried to argue, but it was useless. She was handcuffed within seconds. Sophia screamed in protest, and Daniel, he just looked terrified. For a moment, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This was what they deserved. The next few hours passed in a blur. Daniel, Margaret, and Sophia were taken into custody, and the police gathered more evidence from the warehouse. Ryan and I were asked to come to the station to provide statements, and I found myself staring at the glass windows separating us from the holding cells. I watched as Margaret sat stiffly, her face pale. Sophia paced back and forth, cursing under her breath, and Daniel sat hunched over, his head in his hands. I didn't feel sorry for any of them. A police officer approached me. Would you like to speak with them before the trial? I hesitated, but then nodded. I wanted to look them in the eyes one last time. Ryan gave me a warning look. Don't let them get to you. I took a deep breath before stepping into the room where Daniel was being held. As soon as he saw me, he stood up, his expression desperate. Elena, you did this? I crossed my arms, my voice steady. You did this to yourself, Daniel. His face twisted in frustration. You don't understand. Margaret forced me into everything. I had no choice. I let out a short laugh. No choice? That's funny, because I remember you having a choice the day you signed our divorce papers and left me standing alone. He flinched. I took a step closer, my voice lower. You were a part of this from the beginning, weren't you? You knew exactly what Margaret and Sophia were involved in. You didn't just betray me. You sold your own soul for money. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking frantic. I can fix this. We can start over. Please, Elena, you don't understand what's going to happen to me in here. I stared at him, feeling nothing but disgust. You should have thought about that before you ruined my life. I turned to leave, but before I walked out the door, I looked back at him one last time. Good luck, Daniel. You're going to need it. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Margaret and Sophia didn't even deserve a conversation. They had made it clear long ago that I meant nothing to them, and now they meant nothing to me. The day of the trial came faster than I expected. The courtroom was filled with people, reporters, former business associates, and employees who had once admired Margaret's empire. Now, they were all here to watch it crumble. Ryan sat beside me as the charges were read.
Fraud.
Money laundering. Conspiracy. One by one, the evidence was presented: bank records, intercepted messages, surveillance footage. There was no way out for them. When the judge finally spoke, his voice rang through the silent courtroom. The defendants are found guilty on all charges. There was a loud murmur in the room as the verdict sank in. Daniel turned in his seat to look at me, his eyes filled with desperation. "Elena, please." I simply smiled. Tit for tat, Daniel. Margaret's face was red with fury, and Sophia's arrogant expression had completely disappeared. The final sentences were announced. Years in prison. No way out. No more power, no more wealth. Just consequences. I took a deep breath, letting it all sink in. The nightmare was finally over. I had won. As I stepped out of the courtroom, a wave of relief washed over me. It was over. The people who had betrayed me, humiliated me, and left me broken were finally facing the consequences of their actions. Justice had been served. Ryan walked beside me, hands in his pockets, watching my face carefully. "How do you feel?" he asked. I let out a slow breath. Free. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. No more heartbreak. No more looking over my shoulder. No more feeling like I wasn't enough. I had spent so much time wondering if I had made a mistake by marrying Daniel, if there was something I could have done differently. But standing here, watching him being taken away in handcuffs, I realized something important. I was never the problem. Margaret had always hated me. Daniel had always been weak. And Sophia had been waiting for an opportunity. They had destroyed themselves. I had only helped to reveal the truth. Ryan and I walked out of the courthouse, past the reporters, past the whispers of people who once admired Daniel's family. None of them mattered anymore. As soon as we got outside, Ryan pulled out his phone. "Come on, we need to celebrate. Where do you want to go?" I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. Anywhere that serves strong drinks and good food. That night, we sat in a restaurant, talking about everything except what had happened. For once, I wasn't thinking about Daniel. I wasn't thinking about Margaret, Sophia, or the betrayal. I was thinking about the future. My future. Over the next few weeks, my life slowly started falling back into place. I moved into my own apartment, one that belonged to me and no one else. I started focusing on my career again, rebuilding the dreams that had been put on hold because of my marriage. Daniel had once told me that I was nothing without him, but the truth was I was better without him. Margaret and Sophia had thought they could destroy me. Instead, I had watched them destroy themselves. Every now and then, I would hear updates about Daniel. He was struggling in prison, cut off from the luxury he had once enjoyed. His old business partners had turned against him, and with Margaret and Sophia locked up, he had no one left to protect him. Ryan and I would hear rumors, how he begged former friends for help, how he regretted everything, how he wished he had never left me. But I didn't care. I had wasted enough time caring about Daniel. One day, as I was leaving work, my phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hellos." There was silence on the other end. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in a long time. "Elena, it's me." I stopped walking. The voice was hoarse, weaker than I remembered, but I knew exactly who it was.
"Daniel."
I clenched my jaw. "What do you want?" There was a long pause. I just wanted to hear your voice. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, pity, disbelief. He sounded broken, desperate. But I wasn't the same woman he had abandoned. I wasn't the same woman who had begged him not to leave. I had no more tears for him. "It's too late for that, Daniel." He sighed, and for the first time, I could hear regret. Real regret. "I lost everything, Elena." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. You lost me. And that should have been enough to stop you from making the choices you did. He didn't respond. He knew it was true. After a long silence, he finally whispered, "Do you think we could ever fix this?" I almost laughed. Fix this? After everything? I shook my head. No, Daniel. We're beyond fixing. Before he could say anything else, I hung up the phone. And just like that, I closed the last door to my past. From that day forward, I never looked back. I had survived. I had won. And now I was finally free.